Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. June 6, 2009. That's the day I decided to leave it all behind. The day I chose to turn my back on the world I'd known and seek out a different kind of life. But to understand why, you need to know where I came from. The name's Everett. I spent 8 years in the Army, did 2 tours in Afghanistan. I was good at what I did, too good maybe. The things I saw, the things I had to do, they change a person. When I came home, everything felt different. The constant noise of the city grated on my nerves. The endless small talk and social niceties felt hollow. I'd look around at people going about their daily lives, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong anymore. I tried, though. Got a job in private security, rented a small apartment in the city. But the nightmares wouldn't stop. I'd wake up in cold sweats, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. During the day, I'd find myself scanning rooftops, flinching at sudden noises. The psychiatrist at the VA called it PTSD, said it would get better with time and therapy. But I knew deep down that what I needed couldn't be found in a doctor's office or a prescription bottle. I lasted 2 years in that apartment. 2 years of sleepless nights, of feeling like a stranger in my own skin. Then came the day when I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting in a coffee shop, surrounded by people tapping away on laptops and chatting about their weekend plans. The cacophony of voices, the hiss of the espresso machine, the constant ping of cell phones, it all crashed over me like a wave. I felt my chest tighten, my breath coming in short gasps. I stumbled out onto the street, leaning against a building as I tried to catch my breath. That's when I knew. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't pretend to be a part of this world that no longer made sense to me. I needed quiet. I needed space. I needed something else. It took me a few weeks to get everything in order. I sold most of my possessions, keeping only what would fit in my old Army duffel bag and my truck. I did some research, poring over maps and real estate listings. Finally, I found it, a plot of land deep in the Appalachian Mountains, miles from the nearest town. It wasn't much, just a few acres of dense forest with a small clearing, but it was exactly what I was looking for. The drive out there was long, the roads getting narrower and rougher the further I went. As I left the last small town behind, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The forest closed in around me, the canopy of leaves blocking out the sky. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I reached my land as the sun was setting. Standing there in the clearing, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of the forest, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was it. This was where I would make my new life. That first night, I slept under the stars, the cool mountain air, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was like a lullaby. For once, I slept without nightmares. The next morning, I got to work. I had some savings, enough to buy the basic supplies I'd need. A tent for temporary shelter, tools for building, seeds for planting. I drove into town, loading up my truck with everything I could think of. The locals eyed me curiously. Newcomers weren't common in these parts, but they were friendly enough, offering advice on the best spots for fishing and warning me about the harsh mountain winters. Building the cabin was hard work, but it felt good. There was something satisfying about working with my hands, seeing the structure slowly take shape. I'd never built anything before, but I'd always been good with my hands. I made mistakes, of course. The first time it rained, I discovered my roof wasn't quite as waterproof as I'd thought. But I learned, adapted, improved. As the weeks turned into months, the cabin started to feel like home. It wasn't much, just a single room with a small loft for sleeping. But it was mine, built with my own 2 hands. I added a porch where I could sit and watch the sunset over the mountains, planted a small vegetable garden, set up rain barrels to collect water. Life settled into a rhythm. I'd wake with the sun, tend to my garden, check my traps for small game. In the afternoons, I'd work on improvements to the cabin or explore the surrounding forest. As night fell, I'd sit on my porch, watching the stars come out one by one. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The constant tension that had been my companion since Afghanistan began to ease. The nightmares came less frequently. Out here, surrounded by the quiet strength of the mountains, I could finally hear myself think. But peace, I was to learn, can be a fragile thing, and sometimes the monsters we try to leave behind are nothing compared to the ones waiting in the shadows of our new paradise. It started small, things going missing from my traps, strange noises in the night that didn't sound quite like any animal I knew, a feeling of being watched when I ventured deep into the forest. At first I dismissed it, told myself it was just my old paranoia acting up, my mind playing tricks on me. If only I'd known then what was really out there, watching and waiting. Maybe I could have been prepared for what was to come. But ignorance is bliss, they say. And for a while I was blissfully unaware of the horror that was about to upend my peaceful existence and plunge me back into a world of fear and violence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how it all unfolded, we need to go back to the beginning, back to when the people from town started to go missing. It was late summer when the first person went missing. 2 teenagers from town, out for a weekend camping trip, never came home. Search parties combed the woods for days, but found nothing. No campsite, no gear, not even a scrap of clothing. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The town was on edge after that. Parents kept their kids close, and fewer hikers ventured into the deeper parts of the woods. But life went on. People chalked it up to inexperienced campers, maybe a bear attack. Nature can be unforgiving, they said. I didn't think much of it at first. I was still wrapped up in my own world, enjoying the solitude of my mountain home. But then, old man Carmichael disappeared. Carmichael was a local legend, a grizzled trapper who knew these woods better than anyone. He'd been setting traps and hunting these mountains for over 50 years. The idea that he could get lost or caught off guard by a wild animal seemed impossible. I joined one of the search parties, felt like I owed it to the community that had welcomed me in their own quiet way. We searched for days, combing through dense underbrush, calling his name until our voices went hoarse. All we found was one of his traps, sprung and bent out of shape. The metal was twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. Whatever had done that was big and strong. That night, alone in my cabin, I heard something moving in the woods, heavy footsteps snapping branches. I told myself it was just a bear, but deep down, I knew. This was something else, something worse. The disappearances continued. A young couple on a hiking trip, a forest ranger. Each time the searches turned up nothing. The fear in town was palpable now. People spoke in hushed whispers about curses, about old legends of mountain spirits and vengeful gods. I started carrying my rifle everywhere, reinforced my doors and windows, planted thorny bushes around my cabin. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush set my nerves on edge. The peace I'd found in these mountains was shattered, replaced by a constant gnawing dread. Then I found Thompson's place. Thompson was another loner like me, lived about 5 miles deeper into the mountains. We'd swap supplies sometimes, share a drink, and swap war stories. He was a Vietnam vet, understood the need for solitude. I hadn't seen him in a few weeks, so I decided to hike out to his cabin, check on him, maybe trade some of my venison for his homemade moonshine. The scene that greeted me still haunts my nightmares. Thompson's cabin was destroyed. Not just damaged, but torn apart. Walls ripped open, roof caved in. It looked like something huge had simply smashed through it. And the blood. God, there was so much blood. I found pieces of Thompson strewn across the clearing. An arm here, half a leg there. His head. I found that last, eyes wide and staring, frozen in a look of absolute terror. I emptied my stomach right there, retching until there was nothing left but bile. Then I ran like I hadn't since Afghanistan, fueled by pure animal fear. Back in my cabin, I barricaded the door, loaded every weapon I had. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. This wasn't a bear attack. Bears don't rip people apart like that. This was something else, something monstrous. That night I saw it for the first time. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the clearing in front of my cabin. I was by the window, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line. That's when it emerged. It was huge, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, standing on 2 legs like a man. But this was no man. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur. Its head was like a wolf's, but wrong somehow. elongated with a muzzle full of teeth that looked like they could tear through steel. But it was the eyes that got me, yellow, glowing in the moonlight, and in those eyes I saw intelligence, hunger, malevolence. We locked gazes for what felt like an eternity. Then I raised my rifle and fired. I missed. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't aim straight. The shot echoed through the night, and the creature, it smiled. A grotesque parody of a human expression that sent chills down my spine. Then it was gone, vanishing into the woods with a speed that something that size shouldn't possess. That was the beginning of the siege. Every night it came, circling my cabin, scratching at the walls, leaving deep gouges in the wood. The noises it made, snarls, growls, and sometimes, worst of all, something almost like laughter. They filled my nights. The stench of it, a mix of wet fur, rotting meat, and something I couldn't identify, seeped into everything. I became a prisoner in my own home, too terrified to leave but going slowly mad inside. I slept in short bursts, always with a weapon in hand. I lost weight, my beard grew wild, my eyes sunken from lack of sleep. Days blurred into weeks. I lost track of time, marking its passage only by the rising and setting of the sun and the nightly visits of my tormentor. Then one morning it was gone. No scratches at the walls, no snarls in the dark, just silence. I waited, terror churning in my gut. One day passed, then another, a week, nothing. That's when I knew I had to leave. Whatever that thing was, it would be back, and next time my luck might run out. I packed what I could carry and started walking. No real destination in mind, just a blind need to put as much distance between me and those woods as possible. I ended up here, in this grimy little town hundreds of miles away, took a job in construction. Anything to keep me surrounded by noise, by people, anything to keep the silence at bay. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting, watching. Some nights when the wind carries a certain scent, or a shadow moves just so, I'm back there, back in those woods, staring into those hellish yellow eyes. I hear whispers sometimes, folks talking about the goat man, some kind of local legend. I wonder if that's what I saw, or if it's something older, something that the legends haven't even named yet. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, if I'll ever be able to close my eyes without seeing that thing, without hearing its snarls, smelling its stench. All I know is that out there in the deep woods where people rarely go, there are things, terrible things. And once you've seen them, really seen them, you're never the same. So I sit here in my tiny apartment with its paper-thin walls, jumping at every creak and groan, wondering if today's the day it finds me again, wondering if anywhere is really far enough away. Because the truth is, once you've stared into the face of a nightmare, you never really wake up. September 4th, 2008. Everything changed that day. They always tell you lightning never strikes the same place twice, but life doesn't follow those rules. They call me Asher. Before I was a carpenter, had a wife, 2 kids, the whole white picket fence thing. Car wreck changed that, lost them all. Lost myself for a while. Booze dulls the pain, but not forever. Needed to feel the ground under my feet again, not the bar floor. It was a crisp autumn morning when I made the decision. The kind of day where the air bites at your skin, reminding you you're alive. I remember standing in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the haggard face staring back at me. Bloodshot eyes, unkempt beard, the stench of stale whiskey clinging to my clothes. That's when I knew I had to get out, had to find something, anything to give me purpose again. I started making calls, reaching out to old buddies, anyone who might know of work far away from the city, and its constant reminders of what I'd lost. It was Jimmy, an old high school friend who'd gone into forestry, who finally came through. He told me about a job opening for a caretaker position in the Gila National Forest, New Mexico. Remote, high up, mostly abandoned. Perfect spot for someone wanting to be left the hell alone. It's not much, Jimmy had said, his voice crackling over the phone. Basic stipend, roof over your head. Mostly just keeping an eye on things, scaring off poachers. Maybe doing some trail maintenance when you feel up to it. But Ash, It's isolated. Like, really isolated. You sure you can handle that? I almost laughed. Isolation was exactly what I was looking for. A chance to escape the pitying looks, the well-meaning but suffocating concern of friends and family. A place where the only judgment would come from my own reflection. I'll take it, I said, feeling the first spark of something other than grief in months. It wasn't hope, not quite. But it was movement. A step away from the bottomless pit I'd been drowning in. 2 weeks later, I found myself bumping along a dirt road in a beat-up Forest Service truck, heading deeper into the wilderness than I'd ever been before. The old ranger station came into view as we rounded a bend, a weathered wooden structure perched on the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines and jagged rock formations. "Home, sweet home," the ranger driving me said with a wry smile. His name was Tom, a grizzled veteran of the Forest Service with leathery skin and eyes that had seen it all. "It ain't much, but it'll keep the rain off your head, most of the time anyway." We unloaded my meager belongings, a duffel bag of clothes, a box of kitchen supplies, and a case of books I'd grabbed almost as an afterthought. The inside of the cabin was sparse but functional. A small kitchenette, a rickety table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot in one corner, and a pot-bellied wood stove that dominated the main room. "Generator out back for electricity," Tom explained, pointing things out. "Propane tank for the stove and hot water heater. Outhouse is about 50 yards that away. Radio's there on the desk. Check in once a week, more if there's trouble. Nearest town's about 40 miles down the mountain, but don't expect many visitors. Hunters during season, maybe a few hikers in the summer. That's about it." He paused, giving me a long look. "You sure about this, Asher? It gets lonely up here. The silence. It can mess with a man's head if he's not careful." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread settling in my gut. "I'm sure. This is what I need." Tom shrugged, handing me a set of keys. "All right then, good luck, and remember, radio if you need anything. We'll be checking in." And just like that, I was alone. The rumble of Tom's truck faded into the distance, leaving me with nothing but the whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional call of a bird I couldn't identify. I stood on the porch for a long time, breathing in the crisp mountain air, feeling the weight of solitude settle around me like a heavy blanket. The first few weeks were the hardest. The silence Tom had warned me about was oppressive, broken only by the creaking of the cabin's timbers and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I threw myself into work, repairing loose boards on the porch, clearing overgrown trails, anything to keep my hands and mind occupied. But at night, when the darkness pressed in and the wind howled through the trees, the memories came flooding back. I'd wake up gasping, reaching for my wife who wasn't there, hearing phantom cries of my children. More than once, I found myself fumbling for a bottle that no longer existed, desperate for that numbing embrace of alcohol. Instead, I'd bundle up and step outside, letting the cold shock me back to reality. I'd stare up at the stars, countless and brilliant in a way I'd never seen in the city. Sometimes in those moments, I felt a fragile peace, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to keep living in this vast, indifferent universe that had taken everything from me. As the weeks turned to months, I settled into a routine. Wake at dawn, tend to the cabin and surrounding area, hike the trails to check for any issues, radio in my weekly report. I started keeping a journal, jotting down observations about the wildlife, the weather, my own slowly shifting state of mind. It wasn't happiness, not by a long shot, but it was manageable. The crushing weight of grief began to lift just a little. That's when things started to change. It was late October, the aspens turning gold and the nights growing longer. I'd been at the station for nearly 6 months, and while I wouldn't say I was thriving, I was surviving. Then one morning, I stepped out onto the porch and froze. There, in the soft dirt near the steps, was a set of tracks I didn't recognize. Too big for a coyote or bobcat, but not quite right for a mountain lion either. The print was oddly elongated, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. A chill ran down my spine as I crouched to examine them more closely. "Just a bear," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease. "Probably curious about the smell of your cooking." But deep down, I knew it wasn't a bear. I'd seen plenty of bear tracks in my time here, and these These were something else entirely. Over the next few days, I found myself growing increasingly paranoid. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. The usual night sounds of the forest seemed to take on a more sinister tone. I started keeping my shotgun closer at hand, even during the day. Then came the morning I found the dead jackrabbit on my porch. It was a grisly sight. The poor creature had been torn apart, its fur matted with blood and its bones gnawed clean. But it wasn't the violence of the kill that disturbed me most. It was the deliberate placement. This wasn't some random act of nature. Whatever had done this had left it there for me to find. I radioed it in, trying to keep my voice steady as I reported the incident to the main office. The dispatcher, a woman named Rita, who I'd gotten to know over our weekly check-ins, seemed concerned. "Probably just a mountain lion," she said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. "They've been known to leave kills near human dwellings sometimes. Just keep an eye out, okay, Asher? And don't hesitate to call if anything else happens." I assured her I would, but as I signed off, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much worse. That night I heard it for the first time, a howl that raised the hair on the back of my neck and sent ice water through my veins. It wasn't a wolf, wasn't a coyote. Hell, it wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, long and mournful, then cut off with eerie suddenness. I barely slept that night, shotgun clutched to my chest, every creak of the cabin setting my nerves on edge. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted and on edge, jumping at shadows. Against my better judgment, I decided to do a patrol of the surrounding area. Part of me hoped to find some rational explanation for what was going on. The larger part, if I'm being honest, was spoiling for a fight. Anything to break the tension that had been building. I set out just after sunrise, shotgun slung over my shoulder and a heavy knife on my belt. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of beautiful fall day that would normally lift my spirits. But as I moved deeper into the forest, following a faint game trail, all I felt was a growing sense of dread. About a mile from the cabin, I found the tracks again. This time they were fresher, the soil still damp where whatever had made them had passed, and they were bigger, much bigger. The print was easily twice the size of my hand, with long, curved claw marks gouging the earth. I crouched down, heart pounding as I examined the tracks more closely. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Mixed in with the animal-like prints were others that looked disturbingly human. Large, yes, but unmistakably the shape of a bare human foot. "What the hell?" I whispered, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. Some kind of bear walking on its hind legs? But no, the stride was all wrong for that, and those human-like prints. A twig snapped somewhere behind me and I whirled, shotgun at the ready. Nothing, just the wind in the trees and the distant cry of a hawk. But I could have sworn I felt eyes on me, watching from the shadows between the pines. That was enough. I hightailed it back to the cabin, my earlier bravado replaced by a primal urge to get to safety. Once inside, I barred the door and paced, debating whether to radio for help. Would they even believe me? Hell, I wasn't sure I believed what I'd seen myself. In the end, I decided to wait, to gather more evidence, to be sure I wasn't just losing my mind to the isolation. But as the day wore on and the shadows lengthened, that decision began to feel like a mistake. Night fell, and with it came the storm. The wind picked up, howling around the eaves of the cabin and driving icy pellets of sleet against the windows. I huddled by the wood stove, shotgun across my lap, straining to hear anything unusual over the roar of the wind. Then, sometime after midnight, the banging started. At first it was faint, barely distinguishable from the storm, but it grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like fists pounding on the roof, then like something much larger trying to batter its way in. The whole cabin shook, timbers groaning in protest. I scrambled to the far corner, shotgun aimed at the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep my finger on the trigger. The banging would stop for a while, then start again with renewed fury. Through gaps in the curtains I caught glimpses of something moving out there, something big, circling the cabin just out of clear sight. Once, for just a moment, I saw a hand pressed against the window. It was enormous, covered in dark, matted fur, with long yellowed claws that clicked against the glass. But it was the eyes that haunted me most, glowing red in the gloom like embers in a dying fire. And in those eyes I saw intelligence, hunger, and something that might have been amusement, like a cat toying with a mouse. The siege went on for what felt like days, though in reality it was probably only a matter of hours. Each night the creature, for I was certain now it was a single entity, would try to batter its way in. Each dawn it would vanish, leaving behind only tracks in the snow and deep gouges in the cabin's walls. I barely slept, subsisting on canned food and tepid water, too terrified to let my guard down even for a moment. My mind raced with possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. Bigfoot? Some kind of escaped government experiment? Or something older, darker, the kind of primal nightmare that our ancestors huddled around fires to keep at bay? On the third day, just as I was nearing my breaking point, the radio crackled to life. It was Rita from the forestry office, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Asher, are you there? Please respond." I lunged for the radio, nearly dropping it in my haste. "I'm here," I croaked, my voice hoarse from disuse. "What's going on?" There was a sharp intake of breath from Rita. "Oh, thank God," she said. "We've been trying to reach you for days. The storm knocked out communications all over the mountain. Asher, listen to me. You need to get out of there. Now." "What? Why? What's happening?" Rita hesitated, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's Zeke. They found him this morning." Zeke, I knew him vaguely. Another caretaker, stationed about 40 miles north of me. Gruff old Vietnam vet, tough as old boots. "Found him?" I asked, dread settling in the pit of my stomach. "What do you mean, found him?" He's gone, Asher. It looks like an animal attack, but the Rangers—" She trailed off, clearly struggling to find the words. "The Rangers what, damn it?" I shouted into the radio, fear and frustration boiling over. "There's no easy way to say this," Rita choked out. "Footprints, Ash, big ones and pieces. There wasn't much left to find." Ice water seemed to pour through my veins. I knew with a certainty that left no room for doubt what or who had done this, the same thing that had been terrorizing me for days. "Asher, you still there?" Rita's voice, barely a whisper now. "Yeah," I managed to get out. "Yeah, I'm here. Listen to me, Rita. Tell those Rangers to get the hell away from my place. Tell them it ain't safe. I'm getting out of here." I hung up before she could respond, my mind racing. I had to leave, that much was clear. But how? The creature was out there waiting, and even if I made it to my truck, the storm had likely made the mountain roads impassable. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic preparation. I barricaded the doors and windows as best I could, even going so far as to shove the old wood stove against the fireplace opening. I loaded the shotgun, found an old revolver I kept in a drawer, and paced around the small cabin like a caged animal. Every creak of a floorboard, every gust of wind made me jump. As night fell, a strange calm settled over me, the kind of clarity that comes with accepting the inevitable. I knew deep in my bones that this would be the final confrontation. One way or another, it would end tonight. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. I heard the creature's approach first, the scrape of its claws across the roof, a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the cabin. I crouched in the corner, shotgun at the ready, chanting the same prayer over and over. Whether I was begging God or the devil for help, I couldn't say. Then came a crash so loud it drowned out my prayers. The side window exploded inwards, showering the cabin with glass and snow, and there it was, squeezing its massive bulk through the opening. In the chaos and darkness, I couldn't get a clear look at first, just a blur of matted fur and flashing claws. I fired the shotgun, the blast deafening in the confined space. I don't know if I hit it. The next thing I knew, I was airborne, slammed against the far wall with bone-jarring force. The shotgun flew from my grasp. I scrambled in the dark, hands fumbling for the revolver. The creature roared, a sound so primal and furious it felt like it would tear the cabin apart. Then it The creature roared, a sound so primal and furious it felt like it would tear the cabin apart. Then it had me, seizing me around the waist with inhuman strength. I felt ribs crack under the pressure and fought back blindly, jamming the revolver into its side and firing again and again. The muzzle flashes illuminated the scene in strobe-like bursts. For split seconds I saw matted fur, rippling muscle, and a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was like a wolf's head, but grotesquely elongated, with a muzzle full of dagger-like teeth. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me, blazing red, filled with a malevolent intelligence that was all too human. My shots seemed to have little effect. The creature howled again, the sound tearing at my sanity. I kicked out wildly, somehow connecting with something solid. Its grip loosened just enough for me to squirm free, gasping and stumbling in the darkness. I collided with the overturned table, pain lancing through my already battered body. But the collision knocked some sense into my panic-addled brain. The stove. It was my only chance. As the creature reoriented itself, I lunged for the heavy cast-iron wood stove. My hands found the handle, and I strained with every ounce of strength I had left. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a rusty groan, the stove began to move. The creature charged, claws outstretched. I gave one final, desperate shove. The stove tipped, then toppled directly into the monster's path. There was a sickening thud, followed by a screech of agony as the still hot metal connected with fur and flesh. The cabin filled with the choking stench of burning hair. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to bat away the flames that had caught in its matted coat. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted for the door, slamming it behind me as I plunged into the snowy night. The cold hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't slow down. I ran past the porch with its grisly reminder of the half-eaten rabbit, past the woodshed, and didn't stop until I reached the tree line. Behind me, orange light bloomed as the cabin caught fire, the creature's agonized roars cutting through the night air. I had no plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from that thing as possible. Snow clung to my beard, wind whipped at my face, numbing my skin. I stumbled and fell countless times, each impact sending fresh waves of pain through my battered body. How long I ran, I couldn't say. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless snow-shrouded forest. Eventually, my body simply couldn't take any more. I crawled beneath the overhang of a large rock, collapsing in exhaustion. The glow from the burning cabin was a distant spark on the horizon. My ears rang with the echoes of those inhuman screams. As the adrenaline faded, the full extent of my injuries made themselves known. Broken ribs grated with every breath. Cuts and bruises throbbed in time with my racing heart. And overlaying it all was a bone-deep cold that seemed to seep into my very core. I huddled there, shivering uncontrollably, caught between the fear of freezing to death and the terror of what might be pursuing me through the darkness. My mind, pushed beyond its limits, began to wander. I saw my wife's face, heard my children's laughter. Were they waiting for me just beyond the veil? Part of me longed to let go, to slip into that comforting darkness and be reunited with them at last. But some stubborn spark of life refused to be extinguished. I had survived the loss of my family. I had survived months of soul-crushing loneliness. And I had survived an encounter with something that, by all rights, shouldn't exist. I wasn't about to give up now. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. It could have been hours or mere minutes. The next thing I clearly remember is voices, human voices calling out in the darkness. "Over here, I see something." Flashlight beams cut through the gloom. Rough-looking men in Forest Service uniforms materialized out of the swirling snow, their faces etched with concern and confusion as they took in my battered state. "Jesus Christ," one of them muttered. "What the hell happened to you?" I tried to speak, to warn them about the creature, but all that came out was a hoarse croak. Strong hands lifted me, and I was dimly aware of being carried through the forest. There were more voices, the crackle of radio transmissions, the thrum of a helicopter's rotors. The next few days passed in a haze of pain medication and fevered dreams. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching snippets of conversation from doctors and nurses. Words like hypothermia, broken ribs, possible concussion floated around me. When I was finally lucid enough to speak, a pair of grim-faced Forest Service officials came to take my statement. I told them everything: the tracks, the dead rabbit, the nightly assaults on the cabin. I described the creature in all its terrifying detail, from its massive clawed hands to its burning red eyes. They listened in silence, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. When I finished, the older of the two, a weathered man with salt and pepper hair, leaned forward. "Asher," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously, but you've been through a traumatic experience. Between the isolation, the storm, and your injuries, well, the mind can play tricks on us in those situations." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "We've found what was left of your cabin. There was a lot of blood, some of it human, some... Well, we're still waiting on the lab results. But there were no tracks, Asher, no sign of any animal larger than a coyote in the area." "But Zeke," I said, my voice cracking, "you found him too, didn't you?" A shadow passed over the man's face. "Yes, we did. Mountain lion attack as far as we can tell. It's been a hard winter pushing predators closer to human habitations. It's tragic, but not unprecedented." I wanted to argue, to make them understand what I'd seen, but I could see in their eyes that they'd already made up their minds. Grief, isolation, trauma, these were things they could understand. These were things they could file reports about, things that fit into their orderly view of the world. The truth, the mind-shattering, reality-bending truth of what lurked in those mountains, was something they couldn't or wouldn't face. In the end, I was declared unfit for solitary duty. Not that I could argue with that assessment. My body would heal, but the psychological scars, those would take far longer to fade if they ever did. They found me a small apartment in town, set me up with a job as a janitor at the local school. Simple work, nothing too taxing. The kind of job where people's eyes slide right past you, where you become part of the background noise of their lives. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, certain I can hear claws scratching at my window. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I catch a whiff of singed fur and sulfur. The doctors call it post-traumatic stress. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way I flinch at every unexpected sound. But I know the truth. There are things out there that don't show up on any map. Things that change when the moon is full. Things with red eyes and a hunger for human flesh. They lurk in the deep woods, the high mountains, the dark spaces between what we know and what we fear to know. They're the reason we tell stories around campfires, the source of legends whispered in the dark. Because sometimes those legends are real. Sometimes they come looking for you. The old-timers in these parts, they have a name for creatures like the one I encountered. Skinwalkers, they call them. Humans who've learned to take on animal form, cursed to forever walk the line between man and beast. Me? I don't put much stock in those old stories. I've seen the thing with my own eyes, felt its claws, smelled its rank breath. It wasn't any shape-shifted human. It was a nightmare made flesh, a primal force of nature that had no place in our world of smartphones and satellite TV. I don't know if it survived that night. Part of me hopes the fire took it, sent it back to whatever hell spawned it. But a larger part knows better. You don't destroy something like that with mere fire and buckshot. So I keep my head down. I do my job, nod politely at my neighbors, and try to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But I never forget. And I never stop watching the tree line, especially on those nights when the moon is full and the wind carries echoes of a long, mournful howl. Because I'm the one who lived to tell the tale, and I know that somewhere out there in the vastness of the Gila National Forest, something is waiting, watching, and remembering me too. May 3rd, 2008. The crisp Alaskan air bit at my exposed skin as I trudged through the underbrush, my worn boots crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. The familiar weight of my fishing gear hung from my shoulders, a comforting presence in the vast wilderness that surrounded me. Today was supposed to be about setting trout lines, a routine task that had become second nature over the years. But as I would soon discover, fate had other plans. Call me Jonah. It's not the name I was born with, but it's the one I've adopted out here in the last frontier. Bad luck seems to follow me around like a loyal but unwanted companion, and today would prove no exception. As I made my way towards the river, my mind wandered to the journey that had brought me to this remote stretch of Alaskan wilderness. It wasn't an easy decision, leaving behind the comforts of civilization for a life of solitude and self-reliance. But after years of feeling like a square peg in a round hole, the untamed beauty of Alaska called to me like a siren song. Life here is rough, make no mistake. It ain't all postcard sunsets and pristine lakes, though we have plenty of those. You fight tooth and nail for each scrap of comfort, and the isolation can drive a man a little crazy if he's not careful. But there's a purity to it, a sense of connection to the land that I never found in the concrete jungles of my past. It took me years to build that cabin of mine, to haul in supplies, to learn the ways of the land. Every nail driven, every log hewn was a testament to my determination to carve out a life here. I learned to hunt, to fish, to read the weather in the way the wind whispered through the pines. I thought I had finally found my place in the world, a hard-won solitude that suited me just fine. But I should have known better. Should have known that something was going to put a dent in my carefully crafted existence. It started with those howls. The first time I heard them, about a week ago, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun dip below the tree line. The sound sent chills down my spine, raising the hair on the back of my neck. It wasn't a wolf, though we have plenty of those around here. It wasn't a bear either, despite their frequent forays into the area around my cabin. No, this was something different. Something, unnatural. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down in that primal part of my brain that's hardwired for survival, I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I heard whispers of gossip from my neighbors. If you can call folks living miles away neighbors. They're a hardy bunch, men and women who've chosen to live on the fringes of civilization, even further south than my own isolated patch. They spin tales over crackling radio connections and during rare supply runs into town. Hunters stumbling across ravaged animal carcasses, torn apart in ways that defy explanation. Disappearances blamed on rogue grizzlies, though the evidence never quite adds up. I never gave much credit to those stories before. Living out here, you learn to separate fact from fiction pretty quick. Tall tales are as much a part of Alaskan culture as salmon runs and the northern lights. But now, as I reflect on the events of this morning, I'm starting to wonder if there wasn't some truth to those whispered warnings after all. The memory of what I found by the river this morning is seared into my brain, refusing to fade no matter how much I wish it would. I had set some trout lines the night before, a standard practice to supplement my food stores. The walk to check them should have been routine, mundane even. Instead, it became the start of a nightmare. As I approached the riverbank, the first thing that hit me was the smell. A horrid stench that made my stomach churn and my eyes water. It was like rotting meat, but mixed with something sickly sweet that I couldn't quite place. The kind of smell that kicks your fight-or-flight response into high gear before your conscious mind even registers what's wrong. Then I saw it. Half submerged in the water, caught in the reeds near where I had set my lines, was a doe, or what was left of one. It hadn't drowned. No, this was something far worse. The poor creature had been torn open, its innards scattered in a gruesome display that spoke of a violence I had never encountered in all my years in the wilderness. My old hunting rifle, a constant companion on these excursions, suddenly felt heavy in my unsteady hands. I approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. The water lapped gently at the shore, a stark contrast to the brutality of the scene before me. As I got closer, I could see deep gashes in what remained of the doe's hide, claw marks but larger than any bear I'd ever encountered. I've seen my fair share of animal attacks out here. Bears, wolves, the occasional mountain lion, they all leave their mark in distinct ways. But this was different. The precision of the cuts, the way the carcass had been. I hesitate to use the word displayed, but that's what it felt like. Like whatever had done this wanted it to be found. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach as I realized the implications. If something could do this to a full-grown deer, what chance would I stand against it? I didn't stick around to investigate further. Call it cowardice if you want, but every instinct I had honed over years in the wilderness was screaming at me to get out of there. I hightailed it back to my cabin, my thoughts racing faster than my feet could carry me. Back at the cabin, I spent the day in a frenzy of activity, driven by a fear I hadn't felt since my early days in Alaska. I reinforced the door, adding extra boards and checking every hinge and lock. The windows were next, each one secured as if preparing for a siege. I checked and double-checked the bear trap by the woodshed, making sure it was set and ready. Not that I truly believed it would stop whatever had killed that doe, but it was something, a thin line of defense that might buy me precious seconds if needed. My axe, normally used for chopping firewood, took on a new purpose as I carefully sharpened its edge. The rhythmic sound of stone on metal was oddly soothing, giving my hands something to do while my mind raced through possible scenarios. As I worked, I couldn't shake this gut feeling, a sense of impending doom that settled over me like a heavy blanket. Whatever had done that to the doe wasn't about to leave me alone. I was no longer the apex predator in these woods. I was prey. Night fell like a shroud, the darkness seeming deeper and more menacing than ever before. Despite the gnawing exhaustion that pulled at my limbs, sleep eluded me. I sat in my reinforced cabin, rifle across my lap, jumping at every sound. Every crack of a branch, every rustle outside had me on edge, my finger twitching towards the trigger. The night stretched on, an eternity of tense waiting broken only by the pounding of my own heart. Then, just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I heard it. The howling, closer this time, much closer than before. A shiver rippled through me as the sound echoed across the landscape. This wasn't some damn curiosity kill, some predator testing its limits. No, this thing was hunting, and I was its target. The dawn broke, pale and watery, offering little comfort after the long night. I must have dozed off at some point, exhaustion finally overtaking vigilance. I awoke with a start, disoriented and groggy, my neck aching from the awkward position in my chair. For a moment, as I blinked away the last vestiges of sleep, I almost convinced myself that the events of yesterday had been nothing more than a particularly vivid nightmare. But the ache in my muscles from reinforcing the cabin, the lingering scent of freshly sharpened metal from my axe, these were all too real reminders of the danger lurking beyond my walls. I forced myself to move, to begin the day as I would any other. Routine, I told myself, was important. It would keep me grounded, prevent me from spiraling into panic. I lit the old wood stove, the familiar crackle of the fire, a small comfort in the oppressive silence that had settled over the cabin. As I waited for water to boil for my morning coffee, I took stock of my supplies. I had enough canned goods and dried meat to last a couple of weeks if I rationed carefully. Water wasn't an issue. I had a well on the property, though venturing out to it now seemed a daunting prospect. The coffee was bitter and strong, jolting my senses to full alertness. I needed to think, to plan. Whatever was out there, I couldn't just sit here and wait for it to find me. But venturing out, especially to check my traps or fish, seemed like suicide given what I'd seen yesterday. I spent the morning poring over old maps of the area, trying to recall every detail of the surrounding wilderness. There was an old mining town about 30 miles south, long abandoned but occasionally used by hikers and other solitude seekers like myself. If I could make it there, maybe I could find a working radio, call for help. But 30 miles through dense forest with something hunting me, the odds weren't good. Midday came and went, the sun reaching its zenith and beginning its slow descent without incident. The silence outside was oppressive, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or rustle of wind through the trees. Normal sounds, everyday occurrences that now set my teeth on edge. I forced myself to eat, though my appetite was non-existent. Hunting and foraging were out of the question now, so I needed to conserve my strength and my supplies. As I choked down a meal of canned beans and jerky, my mind wandered back to the carcass by the river. What kind of creature could do that kind of damage? Bears were the largest predators in the area, but even a grizzly wouldn't do what I saw. Wolves hunt in packs, but they don't leave their kills displayed like that. Mountain lions are solitary and powerful, but again, the sheer size of those claw marks ruled them out. I found myself thinking of old legends, stories told around campfires more for entertainment than any belief in their truth. Tales of creatures that straddled the line between animal and monster, beings that lurked in the deepest, darkest parts of the wilderness. I had always scoffed at such stories, secure in my knowledge of the natural world. Now, faced with evidence I couldn't explain, those legends didn't seem quite so far-fetched. As evening approached, the soft golden light of the setting sun did little to dispel the growing sense of dread that had taken root in my chest. I had spent the afternoon checking and rechecking my defenses, more out of a need to keep busy than any real hope they would make a difference. The scratching started just as the last light faded from the sky. At first it was so faint I thought I might be imagining it, a soft scraping sound from somewhere above me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing as I strained my ears. There it was again, definitely real, definitely coming from the roof. My heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs as I tried to process what I was hearing. Could it be a branch scraping against the shingles? But there was no wind, the trees outside standing as still as sentinels in the gathering gloom. With agonizing slowness, I reached for the kerosene lamp on the table beside me. My hands shook as I struck a match, the small flame dancing wildly before catching the wick. The warm glow filled the cabin, pushing back the darkness but doing little to calm my frayed nerves. I stood, moving towards the window with a caution born of bone-deep fear. The flickering light barely penetrated the gloom outside, casting monstrous shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of my vision. That's when I saw them. Eyes, gleaming in the darkness just above the porch roof. Yellow, slitted, filled with an intelligence and hunger that seemed to echo through my very bones. I stumbled back, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. The creature, for what else could I call it, was huge, its shape indistinct in the shadows but unmistakably larger than any animal I had ever encountered in these woods. It seemed closer to a bear in size, yet its form was all wrong, a nightmarish amalgamation of features that my mind struggled to comprehend. It hunched on the roof, powerful limbs ending in claws that dug into the weathered wood with a rasping sound that set my teeth on edge. Those eyes never left me, boring into my soul with an intensity that froze me in place. I couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. I just reacted. My hands found my rifle, the familiar weight offering a pitiful sense of security. Without conscious thought, I raised it to my shoulder and fired. The blast was deafening in the confined space of the cabin, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding me. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, but I barely felt it through the adrenaline coursing through my veins. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd hit it. The creature let out a startled snarl, not quite a roar, not quite a growl, but a sound that vibrated through me on a primal level. But when my vision cleared, those burning yellow eyes still glared down at me, now filled with what I could only describe as fury. I had made a terrible mistake. Panic fueled me now, lending strength to limbs that moments ago had been frozen in terror. I fumbled to reload my rifle, fingers shaking with cold and a dread colder than any Alaskan blizzard I had ever endured. But even as I slammed fresh rounds into the chamber, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The creature moved with a speed that belied its massive size. It leapt from the roof, landing on the porch with a dull thud that shook the entire cabin. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as its claws tore into the floorboards, searching for purchase. My only coherent thought was of fire. Fire, the ancient protector, the one thing that all creatures, natural or otherwise, feared. I lunged for the kerosene lamp, my movements clumsy in my haste. Precious fuel sloshed over my hands as I doused the woodpile near the door, the pungent smell filling my nostrils. With shaking hands, I struck another match. For a moment nothing happened, and a wave of despair washed over me. Then the flames roared to life, a wall of heat and light that momentarily drove the creature back. It wasn't much, but it bought me time, precious seconds that might mean the difference between life and death. I bolted for the inner door, slamming it shut behind me and throwing my weight against it. The old chest of drawers groaned in protest as I shoved it across the floor, wedging it against the door. It wouldn't hold long against the onslaught I knew was coming, but maybe, just maybe, it would slow the thing down. The windows were next. I threw blankets over them, blocking out the sight of those burning eyes. Whatever advantage the darkness gave me, I'd take it. I could hear the creature outside, its massive form prowling the perimeter of the cabin. Each heavy footfall sent tremors through the floorboards, each snuffle and growl ratcheting up my terror another notch. The barricaded door shuddered under a ferocious impact. Wood splintered, the sound of rending timber filling the air. I retreated further into the cabin, my rifle abandoned in favor of the axe. Its weight was reassuring in my hands, though I harbored no illusions about my chances if it came to close combat. Another crash, another shower of splinters. The creature was systematically destroying my defenses, each blow bringing it closer to breaching the cabin. I found myself backing into the far corner, my eyes darting around the room in desperation. They landed on the stacked firewood against the back wall. One last gamble, one final, desperate plan. I began shoving logs aside, my movements frantic but purposeful. A crawl space began to take shape, a meager hiding spot that might, just might, offer a slim chance of survival. The door exploded inwards in a shower of broken wood and twisted metal. I scrambled back, wedging myself into the hastily created crawl space, just as a massive shape lunged through the opening. In the shadows it was all teeth and claws, and a stench that made me gag. The creature was too big for the cabin, its massive form thrashing and clawing as it tried to maneuver in the confined space. Furniture went flying, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass filling the air. My flimsy woodpile offered scant refuge as I pressed myself further back, the axe clutched white-knuckled in my trembling hands. The creature's guttural breathing echoed in the cramped darkness, a wet, raspy sound that sent shivers down my spine. For a few desperate moments, I thought it had missed me. A flicker of foolish hope flared in my chest as the sounds of destruction seemed to move away from my hiding spot. Then, with a roar that shook dust from the rafters, it ripped into the woodpile. I swung the axe blindly, felt it connect with a sickening thud. The creature screeched, a high-pitched sound that made my eardrums throb. Splinters rained down like hellish confetti, dust and bits of fur clogging my nose and mouth. I tried to stifle a cough, knowing it would be my doom. Another enraged bellow, and the creature tore back out of the pile, retreating toward the shattered doorway. I lay in the darkness, shaking, unsure if it was truly gone or simply regrouping for another assault. Blessed silence stretched on, seconds turning to minutes that felt like hours. Finally, I dared to move, every muscle screaming in protest as I crawled from my hiding place. The sight that greeted me was a nightmare made real. Moonlight streamed through shattered windows, glinting off pools of dark liquid I didn't want to identify. The cabin was a ruin, barely recognizable as the home I had painstakingly built over the years. Claw marks scored the walls, deep gouges in the wood that spoke of strength beyond anything natural. The creature's stench lingered, acrid and overpowering. It made my eyes water and my stomach churn. A choked sob tore itself free from my throat as the full impact of the destruction hit me. This place had been my home, my sanctuary, built with my own sweat and blood. Now it was a battlefield, the site of a struggle for survival I still wasn't sure I'd won. I sank to my knees, the axe falling forgotten from my hand. My mind raced, trying to process what had happened, what I had seen. Nothing in my years of wilderness experience had prepared me for this. The creatures I knew, bears, wolves, mountain lions, they were predictable, their behaviors understood. But this was something else entirely. At first I wasn't sure what drew my gaze upward. A flicker of movement outside, perhaps, or some sixth sense honed by years in the wilderness. Whatever it was, I found myself looking out through the shattered remains of my front window. The creature hadn't left. It crouched atop the wreckage of the porch, its massive form silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Even in the dim light, I could see the damage my desperate defense had inflicted. Matted fur was dark with what I assumed was blood, and it seemed to favor one side as if injured. But it was very much alive. Those eyes met mine again, no longer filled with mindless hunger, but with a cold fury that reignited the terror within me. We stayed locked in that silent struggle, predator and prey, as the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky in streaks of gray. Some primal part of me knew what it was waiting for. It was biding its time, waiting for me to leave the shattered remains of my shelter, waiting for me to run. Then the chase would begin anew, a hunt through terrain it knew as well as I did. As the full weight of my situation settled over me, a numbness began to set in. There was nowhere to go, no one to call for help. The vast Alaskan wilderness, once my refuge, had become a cage. The creature was my relentless warden, patient in its vigil, secure in the knowledge that eventually I would have to emerge. All my careful choices, All the years spent crafting this solitary life were reduced to nothing but a prelude to this grim finale. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had come to Alaska seeking isolation, and now that very isolation might be my undoing. Hours passed, or maybe days. I lost track of time, drifting between a numb haze and jolts of adrenaline every time I thought I heard movement outside. Hunger gnawed at me, a constant reminder of my mortality, but it felt secondary to the chilling dread that had taken root in my soul. My throat was parched, lips cracked and bleeding. There was water in the cabin, but my stores had been destroyed in the chaos of the attack. The well was outside, a mere stone's throw from the porch. It might as well have been miles away. I found myself thinking of my family, of the life I'd left behind. Would they ever know what happened to me? Or would I simply become another name on Alaska's long list of missing persons, another soul swallowed by the unforgiving wilderness? Then, cutting through my grim reverie, came a new sound, distant at first, barely audible over the pounding of my own heart, but growing louder, more distinct with each passing moment. Voices, human voices, carried on the wind. For a moment I thought I must be hallucinating, but no, there it was again, and with it a mechanical thrum that I recognized as the beat of helicopter blades, a rescue chopper brought by some miracle I couldn't begin to fathom. Had someone heard the gunshot? Had my absence been noted by one of my distant neighbors? The cause didn't matter. What mattered was that help was coming. Some faint spark of foolish hope reignited in my chest. I staggered upright, ignoring the protest of stiff muscles and the wave of dizziness that threatened to send me crashing back to the floor. With trembling hands, I pulled aside the tattered remains of a curtain, peering out towards the sound. There, just visible above the tree line, was the dark shape of a helicopter. It was circling, clearly searching for something. Searching for me. My voice cracked as I tried to call out, barely a whisper escaping my parched throat. Desperation lent me strength as I stumbled towards the door, waving my arms frantically. If they could just see me, if I could just make it those few yards to open ground. A blur of motion caught my eye. The creature, forgotten in my moment of hope, burst from the woods with impossible speed. Before I could process what was happening, before the chopper crew could react, it was airborne. A monstrous form leaping through the air, covering an impossible distance in a single bound. Metal screeched and buckled as it collided with the helicopter's tail rotor. The craft spun wildly, alarms blaring as the pilot fought for control. It was a losing battle. The helicopter spiraled downward, a trail of black smoke marking its descent. I watched in horror as it disappeared behind the tree line, the sound of impact lost beneath the creature's triumphant roar. My knees gave way and I collapsed, watching as a column of flame rose above the trees. The last flicker of hope vanished, devoured by the unforgiving wilderness and the monster that called it home. I stumbled back into what remained of the cabin, my movements mechanical, devoid of purpose. I sat amidst the debris, defeat settling over me thicker than the encroaching dusk. The reality of my situation was inescapable now. There would be no rescue, no 11th-hour salvation. The creature could wait outside, could stalk me until starvation and exhaustion claimed me. There was no escape, no fighting back against this monstrous hunter that defied everything I thought I knew about the natural world. As night fell once more, I found my gaze drawn to the overturned kerosene barrel by the ruined stove. In the fading light, the spilled fuel gleamed like liquid silver. One last blaze, I thought, one final act of defiance. If I was to die here, lost in the vastness of the Alaskan wilderness, it would be on my terms. I would deny that beast the satisfaction of a slow, terror-filled kill. With shaking hands, I gathered what remained of my possessions. My journal filled with years of observations and sketches. The few photographs I had brought with me, reminders of a life that now seemed like a distant dream. I placed them carefully in the center of the room, a small island of meaning in a sea of destruction. The kerosene came next, poured liberally over every surface. Its acrid scent filled the air, mingling with the lingering musk of the creature. As I worked, I found a strange calm settling over me. The terror that had gripped me for so long receded, replaced by a grim determination. I took up position by the door, my old Zippo lighter clutched in one hand. Through the shattered opening I could see the creature. It watched me with those baleful yellow eyes, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Did it know what I was planning? Could it sense the finality of this moment? "You don't get to win," I rasped, my voice barely recognizable. "Not like this." With a flick of my thumb, the lighter sparked to life. For a moment I hesitated. All my life, all my choices had led to this moment. Was this really how it would end? A snarl from outside made the decision for me. I touched the flame to a fuel-soaked blanket and watched as fire bloomed, beautiful and terrible. The heat was immediate and intense. Smoke filled the air, acrid and choking. I heard the creature's roar of frustration, saw its massive form lunge towards the inferno that had once been my home. But it was too late. The flames spread with terrifying speed, engulfing everything in their path. I closed my eyes, feeling the heat on my skin, hearing the roar of the fire mix with the creature's bellows of rage. In those final moments, as consciousness began to fade, I found myself thinking of the vastness of Alaska, of its beauty and its brutality, its capacity to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. They call these remote parts the last frontier for a reason. It's a place as beautiful as it is brutal, where the line between man and wilderness is sometimes blurred to the point of vanishing. Some might call my ending an act of cowardice, others a tragedy. I call it facing the darkness head-on, denying it the victory it sought. They never found my remains nor those of the creature. Maybe the fire consumed us both, erasing all evidence of the horror that had unfolded in this remote corner of the world. Or maybe, out there in the vast expanse where few dare to venture, something still lurks, something scarred and fueled by a hatred born in those dying flames. They call it the Rugaru, if the old legends hold true. A monstrous creature born from the shadows of the Alaskan wild, neither fully human nor fully beast. And now perhaps I've given it a reason to hunt humankind with a vengeance. To those who come after, who might stumble upon the charred remains of my cabin or hear whispers of the events that transpired here, I offer this warning. The wilderness holds secrets darker than you can imagine. Respect it, fear it, but never make the mistake of thinking you can tame it. For in the deepest, darkest corners of the last frontier there are monsters, and sometimes in our arrogance we become them. July 23rd, 2016. That date is etched into my memory like a scar. It was the hottest damn summer I can remember, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and your clothes stick to your skin like a second layer. I'd moved up to the Boundary Waters a few years back, sick of the city grind and ready for some solitude. The name's Doug, by the way, Doug Larson. Not that it matters much out here in the wilderness. I'd built my cabin with my own two hands on a little patch of land I bought for a song. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Just me, the lake stretching out like a mirror, and miles of trees marching to the horizon all the way to the Canadian border. That's the life I figured I wanted. Peace, quiet, and enough fish to keep me fed till kingdom come. Summer means tourist season up here in the Boundary Waters. Most stick to the resorts and campgrounds, but you get the occasional adventurous type, canoeing deep into the wilderness. Never much bothered me. Figured if folks were willing to brave the bugs and bears to find some peace and quiet, they were my kind of people. That afternoon I was out chopping firewood. Even in the heat of summer, you've got to think ahead to those long Minnesota winters. The rhythmic thunk of my axe echoed across the water, mingling with the buzz of insects and the occasional cry of a loon. I was lost in the work, sweat pouring down my back, when I spotted movement out on the lake. A canoe was making its way towards my place, two figures inside, their paddles flashing in the sunlight. They looked young, loaded down with packs and gear, probably some college kids on a summer adventure. I figured they might need water or directions, so I set down my axe and waved them over. They paddled up to my modest dock, their canoe bumping gently against the weathered wood. The guy hopped out first, offering his hand to his companion. They both stretched, working out the kinks from what I guessed had been a long day on the water. "Afternoon," I called out, making my way down to greet them. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere." The guy grinned, his face tanned and stubbled. Thanks. We were hoping we might be able to refill our water bottles. The lake's beautiful, but I'm not keen on drinking from it. I nodded, understanding their caution. Smart thinking. I've got a well, water's clean as anything you'll find. Why don't you come up to the cabin and I'll get you fixed up? They introduced themselves as they followed me up the path. The guy was Ben, a forestry major from the University of Minnesota. His girlfriend Lily was studying environmental science. They'd been planning this trip for months, a week-long canoe trek through the Boundary Waters. As I pumped water from the well into their bottles, we chatted about their route. They were ambitious, aiming to cover a good stretch of the wilderness before looping back to their starting point. Ben asked if there were any good campsites around, mentioning they were getting tired of paddling for the day. Now, I don't usually like folks camping too close to my land. I value my privacy, and you never know what kind of visitors you might get. But these two seemed harmless enough. Besides, I had a spare bottle of bug spray they looked like they could use. There's a nice clearing about 3 miles up the lakeshore, I told them, pointing north. It's set back a bit from the water, but there's a little creek nearby for fresh water. Just watch out for poison ivy. The stuff grows like crazy around here. Lily's face lit up with a smile that could melt a glacier. That sounds perfect. Thank you so much, Doug. We really appreciate your help. I waved off her thanks. It's nothing. Us folks out here have got to look out for each other. Oh, and take this. I handed them the extra bottle of bug spray. Trust me, you'll need it. They thanked me again, gathered their gear, and made their way back to their canoe. I watched them paddle away, their voices carrying across the water, full of excitement for the adventure ahead. As they disappeared around a bend in the shoreline, I went back to my chores, the sound of their laughter fading into the distance. I didn't think much more about them as the day wore on. I finished splitting wood, did some work on my vegetable garden, and started preparing dinner. The sun was just starting to dip behind the trees, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, when I heard it. A scream. It echoed across the lake, a woman's voice filled with terror. My blood ran cold, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. For a moment I stood frozen, hoping I'd imagined it. Then it came again, louder this time, followed by a man's shout. "Shit," I muttered, dropping the pot I'd been holding. It clattered to the floor, spilling stew across the worn wooden planks, but I barely noticed. I was already moving, grabbing my rifle from its place above the door and racing outside. The clearing I'd pointed Ben and Lily to was a good 20 minutes away, even at a sprint. As I ran, crashing through the underbrush, my mind raced with possibilities. A bear attack? Some lunatic hiding out in the woods? Whatever it was, I knew those kids needed help. Another scream ripped through the air, closer now. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, branches whipping at my face as I tore through the forest. The light was fading fast, making the terrain treacherous, but I couldn't slow down. Finally, I burst through the trees into the clearing. What I saw there will haunt me till my dying day. Lily was sprawled on the ground, her clothes torn and bloody. Ben knelt beside her, screaming her name, trying desperately to stop the bleeding, and looming over them both was something I couldn't comprehend. The creature was tall as a bear, but leaner, all twisted limbs and sinewy muscle. Its skin was dark, almost black, leathery, and stretched tight over bone. But it was the head that made my breath catch in my throat. It was vaguely wolf-like, but wrong. The snout was too long, lined with teeth like razors. And the eyes, dear God, the eyes. They burned in the fading light, a pure, unholy yellow that seemed to glow from within. The creature was hunched over Lily, its claws dripping with her blood. It snarled at Ben, who was frantically fumbling with something in his pack. A knife, I realized, but far too small to be of any use against this monster. For a split second I stood frozen in horror. Then something snapped inside me. I charged forward, letting out a roar that surprised even myself. It must have startled the creature because it whirled around, those terrible yellow eyes fixing on me. I kept running, snatching up a fallen branch as I went. As I closed the distance, I swung it like a baseball bat, putting every ounce of strength I had into the blow. It connected with the creature's shoulder, and I felt the sickening crack of bone. The thing howled, a sound that made my skin crawl, and stumbled back. Ben, bless his soul, used the distraction. He grabbed Lily under the arms and started dragging her towards the trees. The creature recovered quickly, lunging after them, but I was in its way. It slashed at me with claws that could have gutted me like a fish. I dodged, just barely, and slammed the branch into its side again. The creature howled once more and snapped its teeth at me. I could smell its breath, like rotting meat and something sulphurous. It was strong, stronger than anything I'd ever encountered. But it was hurt, and that gave me something close to hope. We circled each other, the creature wary now. I knew I couldn't kill the damn thing, not with just a branch. My best bet was to scare it off, to buy Ben and Lily some time. I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth, the sounds fading as they got further away. Then the creature turned its full attention back to me. It charged, faster than I thought possible. I tried to dodge again, but I wasn't quick enough. A claw raked across my ribs, and I screamed as fire tore through my side. The creature lunged again, its jaws snapping inches from my face. I brought the branch up, trying to fend it off, and then the world exploded. I must have blacked out for a moment. When I regained my senses, the clearing was filled with smoke and the acrid stink of gunpowder. The creature was gone. Sprawled on the ground in front of me was a man I didn't recognize, a smoking shotgun in his hands. He had a wild look in his eyes, his sweat-soaked hair plastered to his forehead. "You all right?" he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. I tried to answer but couldn't get the words out. The man crawled over to me, tore open my shirt, and cursed at the bloody mess of my side. "Hold on," he muttered, fumbling through a pack at his side. "Hold on." He came back with a wad of gauze and some sort of liquid in a little bottle. The pain was blinding as he cleaned the wound, then wrapped it tight. Through the haze, I managed to choke out a thanks. "Name's Wyatt," he said, his eyes scanning the tree line warily. "Heard the screams, followed the sound. You're lucky I was close by." "The kids," I gasped. "Ben and Lily, did you see them?" Wyatt nodded. "Ran into 'em on my way here. Got 'em headed back towards the road. The girl's hurt bad, but she'll live if we can get her to a hospital." I tried to stand, but the pain sent me crashing back to the ground. Wyatt put a hand on my shoulder, keeping me down. "Easy there, partner. You ain't going nowhere fast with that wound. We need to get you patched up proper." As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had happened started to sink in. I turned to Wyatt, my voice shaking. What the hell was that thing?" Wyatt's face grew grim. He looked older suddenly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Something that shouldn't exist," he said quietly. "Something I've been hunting for years. Folks around here, they call them skinners." I must have looked confused because he continued, his voice low and urgent. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've been tracking these creatures for years. Thought they were just local legend until I saw one tear apart my hunting dog. Been after 'em ever since." He helped me to my feet, supporting most of my weight as we started to make our way out of the clearing. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. "My cabin's not far. I've got supplies there, can patch you up proper." As we stumbled through the darkening forest, I couldn't shake the image of that creature from my mind, its yellow eyes burning with an inhuman hunger. The way it moved, like something out of a nightmare. I'd lived in these woods for years, thought I knew every creature that called this place home. But this was something else entirely. Little did I know that night was just the beginning. My life as I knew it was over. A new chapter was about to begin, one filled with horror, hunt, and a desperate fight for survival against an enemy I never could have imagined. It took hours to get back to Wyatt's cabin, deeper in the woods than I'd ever ventured before. The pain in my side was unreal, each step sending waves of agony through my body. Wyatt supported me the whole way, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings, shotgun at the ready. By the time we stumbled through his cabin door, I was barely conscious. Wyatt helped me onto a cot in the corner, then set about tending to my wounds properly. He cleaned the gashes with some sort of moonshine concoction that burned like hellfire, then stitched me up with steady hands. "Drink this," he said, pressing a mason jar into my hand. "It'll help with the pain." I took a swig and nearly choked. Whatever was in that jar, it made the moonshine he'd used to clean my wounds taste like water in comparison. But he was right. After a few minutes, the pain began to dull to a more manageable throb. As Wyatt worked, he filled me in on what had happened after I'd passed out. Ben and Lily had run straight into him as he was making his way towards the sounds of the fight. Lily's injuries weren't as bad as they'd first appeared, nasty but not life-threatening. Once they'd gotten her cleaned up a bit, Wyatt had them drive my truck into town for proper medical attention. "They're shaken up bad," Wyatt said, finishing the last of the stitches, "but they'll be all right." Told him to go to the hospital, then get the hell out of here, head home and try to forget about all this. I nodded, wincing as I tried to sit up straighter. "And the thing, the Skinner?" Wyatt's face darkened. "Gone. My shot scared it off, but it'll be back. They always come back." Over the next few weeks, as I lay recuperating on Wyatt's cot, he told me everything he knew about the Skinners. It wasn't just local legend, apparently. Reports of these creatures went way back. Whispered tales from the native tribes. Sightings by old-timey prospectors and loggers. Most folks dismissed them as campfire stories, or the fevered imaginings of men who'd spent too long in the wilderness. But Wyatt believed. He showed me his scars, faded marks on his arms and chest that looked disturbingly similar to the fresh wounds on my side. He told me about entire families that had vanished out in the boundary waters over the years. Hikers gone missing, their bodies never found. "The authorities write it off," he said bitterly. "Animal attacks, drownings, folks getting lost and succumbing to the elements. But I always had my suspicions." I asked him why the Skinners went after people. "They're hungry," he said, his voice grim. "Their kind always is. And this land, something about it draws them, makes them bolder." As I healed, a cold fury settled over me. I kept thinking about Ben and Lily, about how what was supposed to be a romantic adventure had turned into a nightmare, about how close they'd come to death, how close I'd come. One day, a postcard arrived from Lily. She thanked me for saving her life, said she hoped I was okay. Turns out Ben had proposed to her the night before the attack. They were getting married, moving far away from Minnesota. I couldn't blame them. That postcard was the final straw. As soon as I was strong enough to stand, I told Wyatt I wanted in. I wanted to learn everything he knew about hunting these monsters. Wyatt studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," he said, "but I warn you, once you start down this path, there's no going back. This fight, it becomes your whole life." I thought about my quiet cabin by the lake, about the peaceful existence I'd built for myself. Then I thought about those yellow eyes, burning with hunger. About the terror in Lily's scream. "I'm in," I said. "Where do we start?" Wyatt wasn't kidding when he said hunting Skinners would become my whole life. Over the next few months, I learned everything he knew, how to track them, their hunting patterns, the way they seemed to melt in and out of the shadows. We spent countless hours combing the woods, setting traps, leaving bait. Wyatt was getting old, his joints creaking and his reflexes slowing. But his mind was sharp as ever, and he had decades of experience to draw from. This had been his fight for so long, and now it was mine too. We started close to home, in the areas around our cabins where we knew Skinners had been active. But as the weeks turned to months with no sign of the creatures, we began to range further afield. We'd spend days, sometimes weeks, out in the wilderness, following the faintest trails and chasing down every rumor and whispered story we could find. It was grueling work. The Boundary Waters wilderness is unforgiving at the best of times, and we were pushing ourselves to the limit, slogging through swamps, scaling rocky cliffs, battling mosquitoes and black flies that seemed hell-bent on draining every drop of blood from our bodies. But we kept at it, driven by a determination that bordered on obsession. Wyatt taught me how to read the signs, a broken branch here, a tuft of coarse, dark hair there. The distinctive three-toed tracks that were so easy to miss if you didn't know what to look for. We found kill sites, deer carcasses mostly, but sometimes smaller predators like wolves or bears. The way the bodies were torn apart was like nothing I'd ever seen before, not from any natural predator. But the Skinners themselves remained elusive. It was like they could sense we were after them, always one step ahead. We'd find fresh signs, evidence that they'd been in an area just hours before, but by the time we got there, they were gone. Months stretched into a year, then two. I barely recognized myself anymore when I looked in the mirror. My face was weathered, my beard wild and unkempt. My eyes had a haunted look that I saw mirrored in Wyatt's. We were both changing, hardening ourselves for the fight ahead. Then one early morning, as mist hung heavy over the lake, we heard it, a howl echoing off the hillsides, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was the sound from my nightmares, the same unholy shriek I'd heard that night in the clearing. Wyatt and I exchanged a look. Without a word, we grabbed our gear and set off, following the sound. The trail led us deep into a part of the forest I'd never seen before, the trees growing closer together, blocking out the sunlight. The air grew thick and oppressive, heavy with the smell of decay. As we pushed through a tangle of undergrowth, we found ourselves at the mouth of a cave. The stench coming from the entrance made me gag, the smell of death and rot hanging thick in the air. "This is it," Wyatt whispered, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Their lair." We checked our weapons one last time. I had my rifle, loaded with custom rounds Wyatt had taught me to make. Silver and blessed iron, as effective against skinners as anything we'd found. Wyatt cradled his trusty shotgun, a fearsome weapon loaded with similar custom shells. With a nod to each other, we stepped into the darkness. The tunnels were narrow and damp, the air thick with an oppressive heat. I could hear skittering sounds up ahead and the occasional drip of water from the cavern ceiling. The further we went, the worse the stench became, until my stomach was churning and I had to fight the urge to retch. Then we found them. The cave opened into a vast chamber, and it was a slaughterhouse. Animal carcasses were strewn about, deer, bear cubs, and things I couldn't even identify. They were half-eaten, ripped to shreds, and in the center of the chamber, huddled in the shadows, were the skinners. I counted at least 5 of them, their leathery hides glistening in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. They were even more horrifying up close, their twisted limbs and elongated snouts making them look like something out of a fever dream. But there was something else there too, slumped against the far wall. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was seeing. It was a person, or what was left of one. The body was mangled almost beyond recognition, but I could see it was a man, his clothes tattered and blood-stained. A sick realization flooded through me. It was bait. The skinners had kept him alive, probably for days, luring in other prey with his screams. Wyatt raised his shotgun, his face set in grim determination. I brought my rifle up, trying to steady my shaking hands. For a moment everything was still. Then all hell broke loose. Wyatt fired first, the blast echoing through the cave like a crack of thunder. One of the skinners shrieked and dropped, dark blood splattering the stone floor. The others whirled towards us, their yellow eyes blazing with fury. They charged. Wyatt fired again and again, dropping another. I squeezed off shots as fast as I could, more out of panic than precision. I saw one of my rounds catch a skinner in the shoulder, spinning it around, but it kept coming. Then they were upon us, all slashing claws and snapping teeth. I swung my rifle like a club, trying to keep them at bay. Wyatt was grappling with one, wrestling it to the ground. I caught a glimpse of the injured man in the corner, his eyes wide with terror. I had to get to him. I lunged forward, bashing one of the creatures in the skull with the butt of my gun. It screeched and stumbled back, but another caught me from behind, raking its claws down my back. I roared in pain as I was thrown to the floor. The skinner crouched over me, its rank breath hot on my face. I could see down its throat, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. This was it, I thought. This was how I was going to die. Then a gunshot thundered in my ears. The skinner jerked back, howling in pain. Wyatt stood over me, his shotgun aimed at the creature's head. He fired again, and the cave was filled with the echoing boom. The skinner collapsed, dead. Wyatt hauled me to my feet. We stood back to back, facing down the remaining skinners. They circled us warily now, having seen what our weapons could do. For a moment it was a standoff. Then one of them, the largest, its hide crisscrossed with old scars, let out a bone-chilling howl. As if on cue, the skinners retreated, melting into the shadows of the cave with unnatural speed. We didn't waste any time. Wyatt covered me as I ran to the injured man. He was barely conscious, mumbling incoherently. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandages that the skinners had crudely applied, probably to keep him alive longer. Together, Wyatt and I carried him out of that hellhole, back up to the surface. The sunlight seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of the cave, and for a moment I wondered if it had all been some terrible nightmare. But the weight of the injured man between us and the burning pain of my own wounds were all too real. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. As we made our way back to civilization, I knew my life had changed forever. There was no going back to my quiet cabin by the lake, no pretending the horrors I'd seen didn't exist. The Skinners were out there, and someone had to stop them. That someone was going to be me. The weeks following our encounter in the cave were a blur of hospital visits, police interviews, and sleepless nights. The man we'd rescued, we learned his name was Tom, had been missing for over a week. He'd been on a solo camping trip when the Skinners took him. It took weeks for him to recover physically, and I doubt he'll ever fully recover mentally from what he endured. Wyatt and I told the authorities a sanitized version of what had happened. We'd been hunting, we said, and stumbled across Tom in an abandoned mine shaft. They didn't need to know about the Skinners. Who would believe us anyway? But word got out, as it always does in small towns. Rumors spread about what was really lurking in the boundary waters. Some dismissed it as nonsense, the fevered imaginations of a couple of backwoods hunters. Others weren't so sure. People started to look at the missing persons reports from over the years with new eyes. For Wyatt and me, there was no going back to our old lives. We'd seen the truth, and we couldn't unsee it. The Skinners were out there, and they would keep hunting, keep killing, unless someone stopped them. So we made it our mission. We spent years roaming the remote places, not just the boundary waters anymore, but forests, swamps, and mountain ranges across the country. We heard rumors, hushed whispers of other creatures like the Skinners, lurking in the forgotten corners of the world. We were always on the move, always looking over our shoulders. The hunt became our life, our obsession. We saved lives. I know we did. But we lost things too. Relationships, connections to the normal world. We became as much ghosts as the creatures we hunted. Wyatt died a few years back. Not from a Skinner, ironically enough. Old age finally caught up with him. He went peacefully in his sleep, the way he always said he didn't want to go. I buried him out in the woods, in a place he used to love, overlooking a quiet lake, much like the one I used to call home. Me, I'm still out here. The fight never really ends, does it? I'm getting old too, bones creaking, reflexes slowing. Some nights I lie awake and think I hear claws scuttling in the darkness. I wonder if they're waiting, biding their time, looking for revenge. Truth is, part of me doesn't care anymore. Maybe it'd be a mercy to go out in a blaze of glory instead of just wasting away. Sometimes in my darker moods I think about seeking them out, making it a fair fight, me against all of them. But then I think of Ben and Lily, of Tom, of all those missing person posters tacked up in lonely gas stations across the land. I think of the other folks who might wander too far into the shadows, unaware of the monsters that lurk there, and I pick up my rifle and head back out into the wild. It's the only thing I know how to do anymore. Guess I'll keep doing it till the day they finally catch me, because the Skinners are still out there, waiting, watching, hungry, and someone has to stop them. The acrid smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air as I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. Another memo, another round of layoffs. The year was 2012, and the aftershocks of the financial crisis were still reverberating through the country. I'd survived 3 rounds of cuts already, but this time I knew my number was up. My name's Harlan Brooks, and up until that moment, I'd been a city boy through and through. Born and raised in Chicago, I'd climbed the corporate ladder with single-minded determination, sacrificing everything else along the way. No wife, no kids, just a corner office with a view of Lake Michigan and a slowly emptying bottle of scotch in my desk drawer. As I packed up my belongings into a cardboard box, a wild idea began to take root in my mind. What if this was my chance to start over, to escape the rat race and find something else? I'd always been fascinated by Alaska, that last American frontier. What if I just left? The idea gnawed at me over the next few weeks as I half-heartedly sent out resumes and fielded sympathetic calls from old colleagues. One night, after one too many glasses of whiskey, I found myself on a real estate website, scrolling through listings for remote Alaskan properties. And there it was, 20 acres of untamed wilderness, nestled in the heart of the Tongass National Forest. The price was a steal, probably because it was so far off the grid that it made the back of beyond look like Times Square. I called the realtor the next morning, my head pounding and my mouth dry. "I'll take it," I said before I could talk myself out of it. Sight unseen. The realtor's pause was pregnant with concern. "Mr. Brooks, I strongly advise against purchasing property without—" I cut her off. I said, "I'll take it. How soon can we close?" 6 weeks later, I was the proud owner of a chunk of Alaskan wilderness and a vintage Airstream trailer I'd picked up for a song. As I stood in the driveway of my Chicago condo, hitching the Airstream to my newly purchased used pickup truck, my neighbor Tom leaned over the fence. "Midlife crisis, Harlan," he chuckled, eyeing the rig. I grinned back, feeling a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. "Nah, Tom, this is a midlife awakening." The drive to Alaska was a blur of endless highways, cheap motels, and gas station coffee. I crossed into Canada, marveling at the changing landscape as cityscape gave way to sweeping prairies, then to towering mountains. With each mile, the weight of my old life seemed to fall away, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity on the road, I crossed into Alaska. The realtor had provided GPS coordinates for my property, along with a warning that the last few miles would be off-road. As I turned onto a barely there dirt track, the forest closing in around me, I felt a shiver of something. Excitement, apprehension, maybe a bit of both. The Airstream bounced and swayed behind me as I navigated the rough terrain. Just as I was beginning to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake, the trees parted, revealing a small clearing nestled against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains. A creek bubbled cheerfully along one edge of the property, and the late afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden glow. I stepped out of the truck, my boots sinking slightly into the mossy ground. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and something wilder, more primeval. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath and felt my shoulders relax. "Well," I said aloud, my voice sounding small in the vastness around me. "Welcome home, Harlan." As I began to set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing there, just the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional cry of a distant bird. That night, as I lay in my Airstream listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness, I drifted off to sleep with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but I was ready to face them. Or so I thought. Little did I know, the true test was yet to come. The first few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I threw myself into the task of setting up my new life with the same fervor I'd once reserved for closing deals and climbing the corporate ladder. There was a primal satisfaction in working with my hands, in seeing tangible results at the end of each day. I cleared a patch of land near the creek, building a fire pit and a rough outdoor kitchen. The Airstream, while comfortable enough, felt claustrophobic after long days spent in the open air. I began to sketch plans for a small cabin, something more permanent that could withstand the harsh Alaskan winters I knew were coming. Fishing became my new obsession. The creek that ran through my property was teeming with salmon, and I spent hours learning the intricacies of fly fishing. My first catch was a moment of triumph I'll never forget, a gleaming silver salmon that put up one hell of a fight. As I cleaned the fish that evening, I felt a deep connection to this land, to the cycle of life and death that played out here every day. But it wasn't all idyllic. The work was backbreaking, and the isolation began to wear on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were moments, usually as twilight settled over the land, when the vastness of the wilderness around me felt oppressive rather than liberating. The silence, once soothing, sometimes took on an ominous quality that set my nerves on edge. It was during one of these twilight hours, about a month into my Alaskan adventure, that I first heard the noise. I was sitting by the fire, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the flames dance, when a sound cut through the stillness. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd heard before. Not quite a bear, not quite a wolf, something in between, and somehow worse than either. I froze, the coffee mug halfway to my lips. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the snap of a branch. My hand inched towards the shotgun I'd taken to keeping close by. City boy I might have been, but I wasn't stupid. I knew the wilderness could be dangerous. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the gathering darkness. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined it, a rustling in the underbrush. Something large was moving out there, circling the clearing. I caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of something, fur, skin. In the fading light, it was impossible to tell. I stood up slowly, shotgun in hand, and backed towards the airstream. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to face it in the open. Just as I reached the trailer door, a piercing whistle cut through the air. It wasn't a sound any animal should be able to make. It was almost mechanical in its precision, rising in pitch until it was at the very edge of my hearing. I scrambled inside, slamming the door behind me and fumbling with the lock. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For hours, I sat in the darkness of the airstream, shotgun across my lap, straining to hear any sound of the thing returning. Dawn found me bleary-eyed and on edge, but alive. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, I cautiously stepped outside. The clearing looked peaceful, undisturbed. Had I imagined it all? A vivid nightmare brought on by stress and isolation? But then I saw the tracks. Huge, misshapen footprints pressed into the soft earth around my campsite. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, too large for a bear, too elongated for a wolf. And there, snagged on a low-hanging branch, a tuft of coarse brown fur. I approached it cautiously, my skin crawling. The fur was matted and oily, giving off a faint smell of decay. As I reached out to touch it, a chill ran down my spine. Whatever had left this behind, it wasn't any animal I knew of. That was the moment I should have packed up and left. Any sane person would have. But something kept me there. Stubborn pride, maybe, or a deep-seated need to prove myself against the wilderness. Whatever the reason, I stayed, and that decision would haunt me in the days to come. A week passed without further incident. I threw myself into work, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen and heard that night was just a product of an overactive imagination. I built my sauna, a small wood-fired structure near the creek. The process of gathering rocks, cutting and fitting lumber, and finally firing it up for the first time gave me a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. But even as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a flicker of movement in the trees. When I'd turn to look, there would be nothing there. Just the wind in the leaves, I told myself. Just your mind playing tricks. It was on a crisp autumn morning as I was chopping wood for the sauna that I heard the sound of someone approaching. I tensed, gripping the axe tightly, ready for, I don't know what. But the figure that emerged from the trees was human, albeit barely recognizable as such at first glance. He was a mountain of a man, well over 6 feet tall and broad as a bear. His beard was wild and unkempt, shot through with gray, and his clothes looked like they'd seen better days a decade ago. But his eyes were sharp and alert, taking in every detail of my campsite. "Well, well," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Looks like we got ourselves a new neighbor." I lowered the axe slowly, trying to mask my relief. Yeah, name's Harlan Brooks." The man nodded, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "Gary Erickson, got a cabin about 2 hours upriver." He gestured vaguely north. "Saw your smoke, figured I'd come check it out. We don't get many new folks out this way." I invited Gary to sit, offering him a cup of coffee. As we talked, I learned he was an ex-logger who'd been living off the grid for the better part of 2 decades. He seemed amused by my city boy background, but didn't mock me outright. "So," he said after a while, eyeing me shrewdly over his coffee mug, "how you finding it out here? Any visitors?" Something in his tone made me pause. "Visitors?" I asked cautiously. Gary's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, wildlife, bears, wolves, other things." I hesitated, then found myself telling him about that night by the fire. about the growl, the whistle, the tracks I'd found. As I spoke, Gary's expression grew increasingly grim. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring into the depths of his coffee as if it held some secret. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes hard. "Listen, Harlan," he said, his voice low and serious. "There's things in these woods that ain't in any guidebook. Things the Tlingit people been talking about for generations. Most folks, they hear the stories and laugh 'em off. But those of us who've been out here long enough, we know better." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "What kind of things?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Gary sighed heavily. "Ever heard of the Kushtaka?" I shook my head. "Tlingit legend, means land otter man. They say it's a shapeshifter, part man, part otter, lures people to their deaths in the water." He paused, taking a swig of coffee. "Most folks think it's just a story to keep kids from wandering off, but I've seen things out here, Harlan, things that make me think there might be more truth to those old stories than we'd like to believe." I wanted to scoff, to dismiss it as superstition, but the memory of that night, of the tracks and the fur, was too fresh. You think that's what I saw?" Gary shrugged. "Can't say for sure, but whatever it was, it ain't natural, and it ain't friendly." He fixed me with a steely gaze. "You'd do well to be careful, Harlan. This ain't the city. Out here there's things that'll kill you quick as look at you, and some things'll do worse than kill you." As Gary left that afternoon, hiking back towards his cabin with a rifle slung over his shoulder, his words echoed in my mind. I tried to dismiss them, to rationalize away my fears. But that night, as I lay in my airstream listening to the wind howl through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there was waiting, watching. And maybe, just maybe, it was getting ready to make its move. The weeks following Gary's visit were marked by an increasing sense of unease. The incidents, once isolated, began to occur with alarming frequency. It started small items going missing from around my campsite, only to turn up in strange places days later. My favorite hunting knife disappeared one evening, only to reappear a week later, stuck blade first into a tree at the edge of the clearing. Then came the noises. No longer content to remain in the shadows, whatever was out there seemed to be growing bolder. Night after night, I was jolted awake by sounds that had no place in the natural world. Sometimes it was that bone-chilling whistle, rising and falling in pitch like some otherworldly siren. Other times it was a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I began to sleep with my shotgun by my side, though the rational part of my brain screamed that no mere weapon could protect me from whatever was stalking the nights. My days were spent in a haze of exhaustion and paranoia, jumping at every snapped twig and rustle of leaves. One morning, about 3 weeks after Gary's visit, I stumbled out of the airstream to find my campsite in disarray. The fire pit had been scattered, stones flung yards away with impossible force. Deep gouges marred the sides of the airstream, as if something with claws of steel had tried to force its way in. But it was the footprints that truly chilled my blood. They were everywhere, circling the clearing, approaching the airstream from every angle, and they were wrong, so terribly wrong. Some were clearly animal huge paw prints that could have belonged to a bear, if bears grew to the size of small cars. Others were disturbingly human-like, but elongated and twisted, with razor-sharp claws extending from where toes should be. As I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, a flash of color caught my eye. There, stuck to one of the gouges in the airstream's metal skin, was a tuft of fur. But this was no ordinary animal fur. It was an unnatural shade of greenish-brown, slick with some kind of oily residue that made my skin crawl just looking at it. With trembling hands, I reached out and plucked the fur from the metal. As soon as my fingers touched it, a jolt of something shot through me. For a split second, I wasn't standing in my clearing anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold and wet. I could hear chittering voices, smell the rank odor of rotting flesh, feel clawed hands reaching for me. I jerked back to reality with a gasp, my heart pounding. The fur fell from my nerveless fingers and I stumbled backwards, fighting the urge to vomit. Whatever that thing was, wherever it had come from, it wasn't of this world. And it was here, in my woods, circling ever closer. That was the day I seriously considered leaving. I spent hours sitting in the Airstream staring at my satellite phone, my finger hovering over the call button. One call, and I could have a bush plane here within days. I spent hours sitting in the Airstream staring at my satellite phone, my finger hovering over the call button. One call, and I could have a bush plane here within days. I could be back in Chicago, back in the world of fluorescent lights and traffic jams and problems that made sense. But something held me back. Pride, maybe. Or stubbornness. Or perhaps some deeper, more primal part of me that recognized this as a challenge I couldn't walk away from. Whatever the reason, I put the phone down and picked up my shotgun instead. "You want me gone?" I said aloud to the empty woods. "You're going to have to try harder than that." As if in response to my challenge, the next few days were eerily quiet. No noises in the night, no tracks in the morning, just the normal sounds of the forest, birds chirping, the creek bubbling, the wind rustling through the trees. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like the calm before the storm. I used the respite to fortify my position as best I could. I reinforced the Airstream's door and windows with scavenged metal and wood. I set up a perimeter of tin cans on strings, an old trick I'd read about in some survival manual. I gathered extra firewood, filled every container I had with fresh water from the creek. All the while I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by animals, but by something intelligent. Something that was studying my defenses, looking for weaknesses. It was on the 5th night that it finally made its move. I was sitting by the fire, shotgun across my lap, straining my ears for any out-of-place sound. The moon was full, casting an eerie silver light across the clearing. As I watched, a mist began to rise from the ground, thick and unnatural. It coiled and writhed like a living thing, obscuring the trees at the edge of the clearing. And then I saw it. At first it was just a shadow in the mist, a darker patch of black against the gray. But as it moved forward, it began to take shape. It was tall, far taller than any man, its body a twisted amalgamation of human and animal features. Fur covered most of its body, that same sickly greenish-brown I'd seen before. Its arms were too long, ending in hands that were more like claws. And its face, God, its face. It was like a nightmare version of a human face, stretched and distorted. The mouth was too wide, filled with needle-sharp teeth. The eyes glowed with an unholy yellow light, fixed on me with terrifying intelligence. I raised my shotgun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely aim. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The creature cocked its head, almost curiously, and then it smiled. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. It took a step forward, and I fired. The boom of the shotgun was deafening in the quiet night. I saw the shot hit the creature square in the chest, saw chunks of flesh and fur fly off. But it didn't stop. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it let out that piercing whistle, the sound drilling into my brain, making the world spin. I stumbled, nearly dropping the shotgun. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. But I could hear it circling the clearing, that whistle rising and falling, coming from all directions at once. I spun around, trying to track it, but it was too fast, too elusive. Suddenly it was behind me. I felt its hot, rancid breath on my neck. Clawed hands gripped my shoulders, piercing through my jacket into my flesh. I screamed, more in rage than fear, and spun around, swinging the shotgun like a club. It connected with something solid, and I heard a satisfying crunch. The grip on my shoulders loosened, and I stumbled away, pumping the shotgun and firing again. This time the creature let out a howl of pain. It wasn't invulnerable after all. Emboldened, I advanced, firing again and again. The creature retreated, melting into the mist. I could hear it thrashing in the underbrush, its howls fading into the distance. As suddenly as it had appeared, the mist dissipated. I was left alone in the clearing, my ears ringing, blood seeping from the wounds on my shoulders. I'd survived, but I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this was far from over. The adrenaline wore off quickly, leaving me shaking and nauseous. I stumbled back to the Airstream, my mind reeling from what I'd just experienced. As I fumbled with the first aid kit, trying to clean and bandage the puncture wounds on my shoulders, I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my head. What was that thing? It couldn't be real. Creatures like that didn't exist. They couldn't exist. And yet the pain in my shoulders, the acrid smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air, the deep gouges in the earth where it had stood. All of it was undeniably real. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted face, those glowing yellow eyes. I sat by the window of the Airstream, shotgun in hand, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the clearing, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. Whatever that thing was, it would be back. And next time I might not be so lucky. With shaking hands, I reached for the satellite phone. It was time to swallow my pride and get out while I still could. But when I tried to turn it on, nothing happened. The screen remained stubbornly dark. Frantically, I checked the battery, the connections. Everything seemed fine. But the phone was dead, as surely as if it had been smashed to pieces. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. I was cut off. No way to call for help, no way to arrange for a flight out. I was trapped here, alone with that thing. As the full weight of my situation settled over me, a sound caught my attention. A low, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere in the woods. It took me a moment to place it, but when I did, my blood ran cold. It was the sound of drums, tribal drums echoing through the trees. Suddenly, Gary's words came back to me. The Tlingit people, the Kushtaka. This was their land, their legends come to life. And I was an intruder, a trespasser who had challenged forces I didn't understand. I sank to the floor of the Airstream, my mind racing. I had to find a way out of this, had to find a way to survive. But as the drumbeats grew louder, more insistent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer the hunter in these woods. I was the prey. As the day wore on, the drumbeats faded, but the sense of menace remained. I knew I couldn't stay in the clearing. It was too exposed, too vulnerable. My only hope was to try to make it to Gary's cabin. 2 hours on foot, he'd said. In my current state, with the constant threat of attack, it would likely take much longer. But what choice did I have? I packed a bag with what supplies I could carry, water, some dried food, my hunting knife, and, of course, the shotgun and every shell I had. As an afterthought, I grabbed the tuft of greenish-brown fur I'd found. If I made it to Gary's, he needed to see it, to understand what we were dealing with. Just before noon, I set out. The forest, once a place of beauty and solitude, now felt oppressive. Every shadow might be hiding a monster, every rustle of leaves a prelude to an attack. I tried to move quietly, but my city-bred clumsiness seemed magnified in the hushed woods. About an hour into my trek, I heard it, that now familiar whistle, distant but clear. It was following me. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a run, no longer caring about stealth. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I kept going, driven by pure terror. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that green twilight beneath the canopy. But eventually, my lungs burning, my legs shaking, I had to stop. I leaned against a massive cedar, gasping for breath, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. Nothing, just the normal sounds of the forest. Had I lost it? Or was it just toying with me, letting me tire myself out before moving in for the kill? As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a new sound. Water. Not the gentle burble of my creek, but a deeper, more powerful rush. A river. Hope surged through me. Gary had said his cabin was upriver from my clearing. If I could find the river, I could follow it to safety. With renewed energy, I moved towards the sound. The underbrush thinned, and suddenly I was standing on the bank of a wide, fast-moving river. The water was dark and choppy, promising a deadly ride to anyone foolish enough to try swimming it. But there on the opposite bank, barely visible through the trees, was that a roof? A glint of metal that could be a chimney? I nearly wept with relief. Gary's cabin. It had to be. I was so close. That's when I heard the whistle again. Close, too close. I spun around, shotgun raised, to see the creature emerge from the trees. It looked even more nightmarish in the daylight, its fur matted with blood. Mine. Its yellow eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. It let out a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a word, that seemed to reverberate through my very bones. I understood on some primal level that this was it. The final confrontation. One of us wasn't walking away from this. I fired the shotgun, the boom echoing off the canyon walls. The creature jerked back, black ichor spurting from a wound in its shoulder, but it didn't go down. Instead it charged, moving with impossible speed. I managed to get off one more shot before it was on me. We went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling dangerously close to the river's edge. Its claws raked my chest, tearing through jacket and flesh alike. I screamed in pain and fury, dropping the shotgun to grab my hunting knife. We grappled at the edge of the water, a brutal primal fight for survival. I stabbed blindly, feeling the knife sink into flesh again and again. The creature's howls of pain were deafening, its hot breath gagging me. In a last desperate move, I heaved with all my might, trying to push it off me into the river. For a moment I felt its weight shift, saw a flash of surprise in those inhuman eyes. Then we were both falling, tumbling into the icy embrace of the river. The cold hit me like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. The current seized us, tearing us apart. I caught one last glimpse of the creature, its fur plastered to its body, looking suddenly small and pitiful in the rushing water. Then it was gone, swept downriver. I flailed desperately, trying to keep my head above water. The river tossed me like a rag doll, slamming me into rocks, dragging me under. Just as my strength was giving out, my vision darkening at the edges, I felt something grab me. A hand, a human hand. With a mighty heave, I was pulled from the water, coughing and sputtering. Through blurred eyes, I saw a familiar bearded face looming over me. Gary. "Damn city boy," he said, his gruff voice oddly comforting. "You sure know how to make an entrance." Then the world went mercifully dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was in Gary's cabin, wrapped in blankets, my wounds cleaned and bandaged. Gary was there, looking grim but relieved. "Thought we'd lost you there for a bit," he said, handing me a steaming mug of something that smelled medicinal. "Drink this, it'll help." As I sipped the bitter brew, the memories came flooding back. The creature, the fight, the river. I tried to speak, but Gary held up a hand. "Save your strength," he said. "I know what you saw, what you fought. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Over the next few days, as I regained my strength, Gary filled me in on the things he'd only hinted at before. The long history of disappearances in these woods, the Tlingit legends that spoke of shape-shifting spirits and ancient malevolent forces, the delicate balance between our world and something else. "You're lucky to be alive," he said one evening as we sat by his fire. "Not many who face the Kushtaka live to tell about it." I thought about the creature's eyes, the intelligence I'd seen there, the way it had hunted me, toyed with me. Was it really trying to kill me, I asked, or was it testing me somehow? Gary was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Who knows," he said finally. "Maybe both. The old stories say the Kushtaka sometimes offer a choice. Join them or die. Maybe you passed the test." A shudder ran through me at the thought. Join them? Become one of those things? "What happens now?" I asked. Gary shrugged. "That's up to you, city boy. You can go back to your old life, try to forget all this. Plenty have tried. Or? He turned to look at me, his eyes serious. "Or you can stay, learn, prepare. Because now that you've seen what's out there, now that it's seen you, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." I thought about my life back in Chicago, the rat race, the emptiness I'd felt, and I thought about the primal terror and exhilaration of my fight for survival, the sense of being truly alive for the first time in years. "I'll stay," I said, surprised at how sure I felt. "I need to understand. I need to be ready." Gary nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Well then," he said, reaching for a bottle of whiskey, "let's get started. You've got a lot to learn, Harlan Brooks." As we talked late into the night, the fire crackling between us, I could hear the wind outside. And in that wind, just at the edge of hearing, I thought I caught the faint sound of a whistle, a reminder, a challenge, a promise of things to come. The wilderness had tested me, nearly broken me, but I had survived, and in surviving I had been changed. The city boy was gone. In his place was someone, something new, someone ready to face whatever horrors these woods might hold. My name's Eli Stanton, and I've lived off the grid in the dense forests of northern Maine for nearly a decade now. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when I was just another cog in the machine, a systems analyst for TechForge, one of Boston's rising tech firms. I still remember the day I landed that job. Fresh out of MIT with a computer science degree, I thought I had it all figured out. The salary was impressive, the benefits were great, and the prestige of working for a cutting-edge company had me walking on air. My wife Anna and I celebrated with a bottle of champagne in our tiny Somerville apartment, dreaming of the future we'd build together. For the first few years, it was everything I'd hoped for. I was part of a team developing new AI algorithms for predictive analytics. The work was challenging, exciting, and I felt like I was at the forefront of something big. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The demands of the job grew more intense. 60-hour weeks became the norm, then 70. I'd come home well past midnight, eyes bloodshot from staring at screens all day, only to boot up my laptop and continue working. Anna would leave post-it notes on the fridge, reminders of dinner dates I'd missed, friends gatherings I'd forgotten. I told myself it was temporary, that once we finished this big project, things would calm down. But they never did. There was always another deadline, another crisis, another reason to stay late at the office. I remember the night everything changed with painful clarity. It was a Tuesday in late October. I was hunched over my desk debugging a particularly nasty piece of code when my phone buzzed. It was Anna. I silenced it without even looking, promising myself I'd call her back in 5 minutes. Just 5 more minutes to fix this bug. Those 5 minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. By the time I finally checked my phone, I had 12 missed calls and a voicemail that would haunt me for years to come. Anna's voice was shaky, panicked. She'd been in an accident on the way home from her sister's place. The car had skidded on a wet road, flipped over. She was trapped, scared, and in pain. She needed me, but I wasn't there. I was 20 miles away, so engrossed in lines of code that I'd ignored my wife's desperate pleas for help. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. Anna was gone, and with her, any semblance of the life I'd been living. The following weeks passed in a blur of grief and guilt. I couldn't bring myself to return to work, couldn't bear to look at a computer screen without thinking of that night. The job that had once been my pride and joy now felt hollow, meaningless. It was during this dark period that I stumbled across an old journal of Anna's. In it, she'd written about a dream we'd once shared, to leave the city behind, to live simply, close to nature. It was a pipe dream we'd discussed in our early days together, before careers and mortgages had taken over our lives. Reading those words, something shifted inside me. I realized I couldn't continue on the path I was on. The life I'd been living, the endless hours, the constant stress, the disconnection from the real world, it had cost me everything that truly mattered. So I made a decision that would have seemed insane to my younger self. I quit my job, sold our apartment and most of our possessions, and used what little savings we had left to buy a small, run-down cabin deep in the Maine wilderness. The transition wasn't easy. I arrived at the cabin in early spring just as the last of the winter snow was melting. The place was barely habitable. A leaky roof, no running water, and a wood stove that seemed more apt to smoke you out than provide heat. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was far from the world I'd left behind. Those first few months were a crash course in survival. I learned to chop wood until my hands were blistered and raw. I figured out how to patch the roof, how to filter water from the nearby stream, how to identify edible plants in the forest. Every day brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. I remember the first time I successfully tracked and hunted a deer. It was early autumn, and I'd been living mostly on canned goods and whatever I could forage. I'd read books on hunting, practiced with my rifle, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. I followed the deer's trail for hours, moving as quietly as I could through the underbrush. When I finally got a clear shot, I hesitated. Taking a life, even for food, wasn't something I took lightly. But hunger is a powerful motivator, and I knew I needed to learn to provide for myself. The shot rang out, echoing through the trees. The deer dropped, and as I approached it, I felt a mix of sadness and a strange sense of connection to the land around me. I field-dressed the animal as I'd learned from my books, grateful for the sustenance it would provide, and determined not to waste any part of it. That night, as I sat by the fire eating venison I'd hunted and cooked myself, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the hollow pride of closing a big account or debugging a complex system. This was something more primal, more real. As the seasons changed, so did I. The soft hands of a desk jockey grew calloused and strong, my once pale skin tanned and weathered. I learned to read the forest, to know when a storm was coming by the way the birds fell silent, to find my way home by the position of the sun and stars. I built a small greenhouse, heating it through the harsh Maine winters with a combination of solar panels and a clever system of compost heat. I learned to preserve food for the long winters. Canning, smoking, and root cellaring became second nature. The isolation was difficult at times. There were nights when the silence pressed in around me, and I longed for the sound of another human voice. But gradually I found a different kind of companionship in the rhythms of the forest. The chattering of squirrels, the haunting call of loons on the nearby lake, even the howl of distant wolves. These became the soundtrack of my new life. I made occasional trips into the nearest town, about 20 miles away, for supplies I couldn't produce myself, and to maintain some tenuous connection to the outside world. The locals regarded me with a mix of curiosity and respect. To them, I was the strange hermit from the woods, and they seemed content to leave me to my solitude. As the years passed, I found a peace I'd never known in my previous life. The constant anxiety, the nagging feeling that I should be doing more, achieving more, it all faded away. In its place came a deep connection to the land and a contentment in the simplicity of my days. But nature, I was to learn, is not always peaceful, and solitude, no matter how cherished, can be shattered in an instant. It was on a night much like any other that I first realized the woods I'd come to see as my sanctuary held secrets darker and more terrifying than I could have imagined. The first signs were subtle, so much so that I almost missed them. It was late summer, and I was out checking my trap lines. I'd set up a few simple snares to catch rabbits, a good source of protein and fur for the coming winter. As I approached the first trap, something felt off. The forest was quiet, unnaturally so. Usually this time of year you'd hear the constant buzz of insects, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. But that day there was nothing. Just an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I found the first trap empty, which wasn't unusual, but as I got closer I noticed something strange. The snare had been triggered, but there was no rabbit. Instead, the wire was bent and twisted, as if something much larger had been caught and then broken free. Around the trap the ground was torn up, deep furrows in the earth that no rabbit could have made. I knelt down to examine the tracks, my mind racing through the possibilities. Bear? No, the claw marks were all wrong. Wolf? Possible, but we didn't get many this far south, and the prints looked off somehow. They were canine in shape, but elongated, almost human-like in their articulation. And they were huge, easily twice the size of my own boot print. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was looking at something I couldn't explain. In my years in these woods, I'd become familiar with every track, every sign of the animals that called this place home. But this was something new, something that shouldn't be here. I quickly checked the rest of my traps, finding a similar scene at each one, all triggered, all empty, all surrounded by those same strange tracks. By the time I made it back to the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I bolted the door behind me, something I hadn't done since my first nervous nights in the woods years ago. That night I pored over my field guides, searching for any animal that could have left those tracks. I came up empty. The closest match was a wolf, but even that wasn't right. The shape was similar, but the size. Nothing in these woods should be leaving prints that big. I told myself I was overreacting, that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a large wolf passing through from up north, or a bear walking funny. Anything to rationalize what I'd seen, but deep down I knew. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other changes in the forest. The deer, usually plentiful this time of year, seemed to have vanished. My game cameras, set up to track animal movements, came up empty night after night. It was as if all the usual inhabitants of the woods had simply disappeared. Then came the sounds. It started as a low, distant rumble that I initially mistook for thunder. But the sky was clear, stars twinkling coldly in the black expanse above. The sound came again, closer this time, a deep guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. I'd heard plenty of animal calls in my time here, the mournful howl of wolves, the screech of a fox, even the occasional roar of a black bear. But this was something altogether different. It was primal, ancient, a sound that spoke to some deep, instinctual part of my brain and said, quite clearly, danger. I found myself sleeping less, spending my nights by the window, rifle close at hand, straining to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. But the thing, whatever it was, remained elusive, just out of sight, always at the edge of the shadows. It was around this time that I started having the dreams, vivid, terrifying visions that would jolt me awake, heart pounding, sweat soaking my sheets. In them, I was running through the woods, something massive and dark always just behind me. I could hear its breathing, feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, but I never saw it clearly, never turned around. In the dreams, I knew that to look upon it would be to invite madness. I began to dread the coming of night, to fear the darkness that had once been as comfortable to me as an old friend. The woods that had been my sanctuary now felt like a cage, the trees no longer sheltering, but oppressive, hiding who knows what in their depths. It was on a crisp autumn evening that things escalated. I was out by the woodpile, splitting logs for the winter, when I heard a commotion from the small clearing where I keep my chickens. I'd started the coop a few years back, a way to have fresh eggs without needing to make the long trip into town. The chickens were in a panic, their frightened squawks piercing the evening air. I grabbed my axe and ran toward the coop, expecting to find a fox or maybe a raccoon. What I saw instead stopped me dead in my tracks. The coop, a sturdy structure I'd built myself out of thick logs and heavy wire, was in shambles. The door had been ripped clean off its hinges, the wire mesh torn apart as if it were tissue paper. Feathers were everywhere, and the ground was dark with blood. But it was the footprints that truly chilled me to the bone. They were the same as I'd seen by my traps, only fresher, clearer, and this time there was no mistaking their path. They led directly from the ruined coop to the edge of the forest, and there, just at the tree line, half hidden in the growing darkness, I saw a pair of eyes reflecting the dying light. They were huge, glowing with an intelligence that was anything but animal. For a moment, just a heartbeat, we stared at each other. Then, with a low growl that I felt more than heard, the thing melted back into the shadows of the forest. I stood there, axe clutched forgotten in my trembling hands, the ruined coop behind me, and those inhuman eyes seared into my memory. And I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that my life in these woods would never be the same again. The peace I'd found here, the sanctuary I'd built for myself, it had all been an illusion. The forest had secrets, dark and ancient, and I was no longer just an observer. I was part of it now, for better or worse. And as the last light faded from the sky and the woods around me came alive with unfamiliar sounds, I realized that my real test of survival was only just beginning. The night after the chicken coop incident, I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside had me bolt upright, heart pounding. By dawn, I was exhausted but wired, my mind racing with possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. I knew I needed help, or at least information. As much as I'd embraced solitude, I realized my isolation had become a liability. So for the first time in months, I made the trek into town. Millfield was a small place, barely more than a main street, with a handful of shops and a diner that doubled as the social hub. As I walked down the cracked sidewalk, I could feel eyes on me. To them, I must have looked wild, unkempt beard, clothes worn and patched, eyes darting nervously. I made my way to the diner, hoping a familiar face might offer some answers. The bell above the door jangled as I entered, and conversation stuttered to a halt. I recognized a few faces, Marge behind the counter, old Tom in his usual booth. But it was the stranger in the corner that caught my eye. He was older, probably in his 70s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. I took a seat at the counter, ordered a coffee, and tried to ignore the whispers around me. Marge slid a chipped mug my way, concern etched on her face. "You all right, Eli? You're looking a mite peaked." I managed a weak smile. "Just some trouble up at the cabin. Thought I might ask around, see if anyone's noticed anything strange in the woods lately." The diner fell silent again, and I could feel the weight of unspoken words in the air. It was the old man in the corner who finally broke the silence. "Might be you'd better come sit with me, son. Sounds like we got some talking to do." I made my way over to his booth, coffee in hand. He introduced himself as Harold Winters, a lifelong resident of the area. As I sat down, he fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Now, why don't you tell me exactly what you've been seeing up in those woods?" So I did. I told him everything, the tracks, the sounds, the ruined coop, the eyes in the darkness. As I spoke, I saw something like recognition flicker in his gaze. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "Damn," he muttered. "It's starting again." My heart rate picked up. "What's starting again? You've seen this before?" Harold nodded slowly. "Not me personally, but my granddaddy, he used to tell stories. Old legends from when this place was first settled. Most folks nowadays write 'em off as campfire tales, but—" He trailed off, looking out the window at the distant line of trees. "But what?" I pressed. He turned back to me, his eyes hard. "But some of us know better. What you're describing, it ain't natural. Round here we call it the Wendigo." Wendigo. The word felt strange on my tongue. "Like the Native American legend?" Harold shook his head. "Similar maybe, but this is something older. Something that was here long before any settlers, native or otherwise. It sleeps for decades, sometimes centuries. But when it wakes," he shuddered, "it hungers." I listened, rapt, as Harold spun a tale that chilled me to the bone. He spoke of cycles of disappearances dating back to the earliest days of the town, of hunters found torn apart in the deep woods, of entire families vanishing from isolated homesteads, with only those same massive inhuman tracks left behind. "But why now?" I asked. "I've been up there for years. Why is this happening all of a sudden?" Harold's face grew grim. "The why ain't always clear. Sometimes it's triggered by human activity, logging, mining, disturbing old places best left alone. Sometimes—" he hesitated. "Sometimes it's drawn to a particular person, someone with a darkness in them, or a deep connection to the land." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Was it me? Had my presence somehow awakened this thing? As if reading my thoughts, Harold reached across the table and gripped my arm. "Now don't you go blaming yourself. This thing, it's beyond any one person. What matters now is what you're going to do about it." I blinked at him. "Do about it? What can I do?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "You can fight, son. That's what we've always done. Every time it wakes, someone has to face it, to drive it back to sleep." The idea seemed absurd. Me, an ex-programmer turned hermit, facing off against some ancient monstrous entity. But as I looked into Harold's eyes, I saw no hint of jest, only a deep, unwavering conviction. "How?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harold glanced around the diner, then leaned in close. "Meet me at the old church on Willow Road tonight, midnight. I'll tell you everything I know." As I left the diner, my head was spinning. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as superstition, the ramblings of an old man. But I couldn't shake the memory of those eyes in the darkness, the primal fear they had awakened in me. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, gathering supplies in town. Batteries, extra ammunition for my rifle, first aid supplies. As the sun began to set, I headed for the old church Harold had mentioned. It was a decrepit structure, long abandoned, its white paint peeling and windows boarded up. As I approached, I saw a faint light flickering inside. Harold was already there, a lantern at his feet, a large worn book in his hands. "Glad you came," he said as I entered. "We've got work to do." For the next several hours, Harold shared with me the accumulated knowledge of generations. He showed me old journals, handed down through his family, detailing encounters with the creature. He taught me how to make protective symbols, how to create barriers it couldn't cross. But most importantly, he told me how to kill it. Silver, he said, pulling out an ancient-looking revolver. Blessed silver, forged under a full moon. It's the only thing that can hurt it. As he pressed the gun into my hands, the weight of what I was facing truly hit me. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. If what Harold said was true, this thing would keep killing, keep feeding, unless someone stopped it. Unless I stopped it. As I left the church, the silver revolver heavy in my pocket, I looked up at the moon. It was waxing, nearly full. According to Harold, that's when the creature would be at its strongest, when it would hunt. I had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to ready myself for a confrontation with something out of humanity's darkest nightmares. As I drove back to my cabin, the forests on either side of the road seemed to press in, darker and more menacing than ever before. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. For years I'd come to the woods to escape the complexities of the modern world, to find peace in simplicity. Now I found myself longing for the simple problems of my old life. Lines of code could be debugged, system crashes could be fixed. But this was something else entirely. A test not just of survival, but of courage, of the very fabric of what I believed about the world. As I pulled up to my cabin, I saw something move in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Just for a moment, a flash of eyes reflecting my headlights. Then it was gone. I got out of the truck slowly, the silver revolver clutched in my hand. The night was alive with sounds, the wind in the trees, the call of a distant owl. And underneath it all, just at the edge of hearing, a low, rumbling growl. A challenge, a promise. The hunt was on. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation and mounting dread. I fortified my cabin as best I could, using the symbols and techniques Harold had taught me. Salt lines across thresholds, protective runes carved into door frames, bundles of herbs hung in windows. To an outsider, it might have looked like the ravings of a madman, but I knew better now. I spent hours practicing with the silver revolver, getting a feel for its weight, its recoil. It only held 6 shots, 6 chances to end this nightmare. I couldn't afford to miss. As the full moon approached, the forest around me seemed to hold its breath. The usual nighttime sounds, the hooting of owls, the rustle of small animals, fell silent. It was as if the entire wood was waiting, watching. On the night of the full moon, I sat on my porch, the silver revolver in my lap, Harold's journals spread out before me. The old man had offered to come up, to face this thing with me, but I'd refused. This was my home, my fight. And if I was honest with myself, a small part of me still hoped this was all some elaborate misunderstanding. That come morning, I'd laugh at myself for getting so worked up over nothing. That hope died as the moon reached its zenith. The sound came first, that same deep guttural growl I'd heard before, but louder now, closer. It echoed through the trees, setting my teeth on edge and sending a primal jolt of fear down my spine. Then I saw it. It emerged from the tree line slowly, almost casually. In the bright moonlight, I could finally see it clearly. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a nightmarish blend of wolf and man. Matted fur covered its muscular frame, and its hands ended in long, vicious claws. But it was the face that truly horrified me. Elongated, wolf-like, but with an intelligence in its eyes that was terrifyingly human. For a long moment we just stared at each other. I felt frozen, rooted to the spot by a mix of terror and awe. This was a creature out of legend, something that shouldn't exist in our rational, modern world. Yet here it was, regarding me with eyes that reflected not just hunger, but a cold, alien intelligence. It was the creature that moved first. One moment it was at the edge of the clearing, the next it was halfway to my porch, covering the distance in a burst of speed that my eyes could barely follow. The spell of inaction broken, I raised the revolver and fired. The rapport of the gun was deafening in the quiet night. The creature jerked as the silver bullet struck its shoulder, letting out a roar of pain and rage that shook the very air. But it didn't fall. Instead, it charged. I barely had time to squeeze off another shot before it was upon me. The bullet grazed its head, opening a smoking furrow across its skull, but it wasn't enough to stop its momentum. We went down in a tangle of limbs, the gun flying from my grasp. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival. The creature was incredibly strong, its claws raking across my chest, tearing through my clothes and into flesh. I fought back with everything I had, landing punches and kicks that would have felled any normal animal, but seemed to only enrage this beast further. As we grappled, rolling across the porch and into the yard, I caught glimpses of the night sky above, the cold moon, the distant stars. I thought of Anna, of the life I'd left behind, of the peace I'd found in these woods, now shattered forever. The creature pinned me, its hot breath on my face, jaws opening wide to deliver a killing bite. In that moment, a strange calm came over me. I was done running, done hiding. If this was to be my end, I would meet it head on. With the last of my strength, I reached out, my hand closing around a familiar shape in the grass. The revolver. I brought it up just as the creature lunged, shoving the barrel into its open mouth and pulling the trigger. The gunshot was muffled this time, but the effect was immediate. The creature reared back, dark blood pouring from its ruined maw. It thrashed wildly, claws raking the air, before collapsing to the ground. I scrambled away, keeping the gun trained on the twitching form. Slowly, before my eyes, it began to change. The fur receded, the muscles shrank, the inhuman features melted away. In the end, what lay before me was not a monster but a man. Old, withered, his skin stretched tight over his bones. As I watched, his eyes fluttered open. They were human eyes now, filled with pain and something else. Relief, perhaps, recognition. His lips moved, and I leaned in close to hear his whispered words. "Thank you," he breathed. And then he was gone. I sat there for a long time, the cooling body beside me, the gun heavy in my hand. The night was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the tense, waiting quiet of before, but a peaceful stillness, as if the forest itself was breathing a sigh of relief. When the sun rose, I buried the old man's body deep in the woods. I said no words over the grave. There was nothing to say. In the days that followed, I thought long and hard about what to do next. Part of me wanted to run, to go back to the city and try to forget everything that had happened. But a larger part knew that wasn't an option. This place, these woods, they were a part of me now. For better or worse, this was my home. I made some changes, though. I started making regular trips into town, building connections with the locals. I shared what I'd learned with Harold and a few others who knew the old stories. Together, we vowed to keep watch, to be ready if anything like this ever happened again. As for me, I stayed in my cabin, but I was no longer just a hermit in the woods. I was a guardian, a protector, someone who knew the darkness that could lurk in wild places, but chose to face it rather than flee. The woods are quiet now, peaceful, but I keep the silver revolver close, and I watch the moon, always watching, always ready, because now I know the truth that most of the world has forgotten. There are older things in this world, ancient and powerful, things that sleep but never die, and when they wake, someone needs to be there. Someone needs to stand against the darkness. That someone is me. The rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt gave way to the crunch of gravel as I turned onto the narrow road leading into the depths of the Chippewa National Forest. It was late August 1987, and the air hung heavy with the promise of an early autumn. I am Joseph Birdwing, though most folks around here just call me Joe. At 32, I'd spent the last 6 years as a seasonal ranger in these woods, a job that suited me far better than any I'd held before. Growing up on the White Earth Reservation, I'd learned early on to appreciate the solitude and wisdom the forest offered. My grandfather, an Ojibwe elder, used to tell me, "The trees have more to teach us than any book, Joseph. You just need to learn how to listen." Those words had stuck with me, shaping my path in ways I couldn't have imagined as a boy. As I navigated the winding road, memories of my childhood flooded back. I remembered the smell of sage burning in our small home, the sound of my grandmother's laughter as she told stories by the fire, and the weight of responsibility I felt as the oldest of 5 siblings. Life on the reservation hadn't been easy, but it had given me a strength and connection to the land that served me well in my current role. The forest seemed to close in around my government-issued truck, the branches of towering pines and birch trees creating a canopy that filtered the fading daylight. I'd made this drive countless times before, but something felt different today. Maybe it was the mission itself, investigating the disappearance of campers near an old fire lookout tower. Or maybe it was something else, a primal instinct warning me of dangers ahead. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 6:43 p.m. I had about an hour of decent light left, maybe less with the thick cloud cover rolling in. The radio crackled to life, startling me from my thoughts. "Ranger Birdwing, come in, over." I recognized the voice of Diane, our dispatch operator, back at headquarters. "This is Birdwing. Go ahead, Diane." "Joe, we've got an update on those missing campers. A hiker found a backpack about 2 miles east of the old Itasca Tower. Might be connected." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Any signs of the owners?" There was a pause before Diane replied, her voice tight. "Negative, but Joe, the hiker said the pack was torn up pretty bad, like something had been at it." I absorbed this information, my mind racing through possibilities. Bears were common enough in these parts, but they rarely bothered properly stored gear. "All right, I'm about 30 minutes out from the tower. I'll check it out and report back." "Be careful out there, Joe. Something doesn't feel right about this one." I couldn't help but agree. "Copy that. Birdwing out." As I replaced the radio handset, a memory surfaced unbidden. My grandfather, his face weathered by years under the sun, looking at me with an intensity I'd never forget. "There are old spirits in these woods, Joseph," he'd said. "Some good, some not so good. Always respect the forest, but never forget that it can be dangerous." At the time, I'd written it off as the ramblings of an old man trying to scare a reckless teenager. Now, with years of experience under my belt and the weight of responsibility on my shoulders, I wasn't so sure. The road narrowed further, forcing me to slow down. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the truck. I'd never been one for superstition, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, tracking my progress through its domain. As I approached the point where I'd need to continue on foot, a flash of movement caught my eye. I hit the brakes, peering through the windshield. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a figure dart between the trees, too large to be a deer, too quick and upright to be a bear. But when I blinked, it was gone. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, straining my eyes against the growing darkness. Nothing moved. The forest was eerily still, not even a breeze stirring the leaves. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "Get it together, Joe," I muttered to myself. "You've got a job to do." Grabbing my pack and flashlight, I stepped out of the truck. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine and something else, a faint, musty odor I couldn't quite place. I checked my sidearm, an old .357 Magnum that had seen me through more than a few tight spots, then started up the trail towards the fire tower. Little did I know, with each step I was walking deeper into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The trail to the old fire lookout tower was overgrown, a testament to how little it had been used in recent years. Ferns and underbrush brushed against my legs as I made my way forward, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth with each step. The air grew thicker as I moved deeper into the forest, the canopy above blocking out what little remaining daylight struggled to pierce the cloud cover. I had been walking for about 20 minutes when I first noticed something was off. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the call of birds settling in for the night, were conspicuously absent. An unnatural silence had fallen over the woods, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. It was then that I spotted the first carcass. At first glance, I thought it was just a fallen log, half hidden in the undergrowth. But as I drew closer, the unmistakable form of a deer came into focus. I knelt down, my hand instinctively moving to the butt of my gun as I examined the remains. The deer's throat had been torn out, the wound ragged and brutal. This wasn't the clean kill of a predator hunting for food. Whatever had done this had been violent, almost angry. I'd seen my fair share of animal attacks over the years, but this was different. The body hadn't been eaten, just destroyed. A chill ran down my spine as I stood up, my eyes scanning the surrounding forest. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I could have sworn I heard a low, guttural sound coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. As I continued along the trail, I encountered more bodies, 3 more deer, a raccoon, even a black bear cub. All bore the same savage wounds, their lifeless eyes staring accusingly as I passed. The musty smell I'd noticed earlier grew stronger, mingling with the metallic scent of blood and the sickly sweet odor of decay. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. There are old spirits in these woods, Joseph, some good, some not so good. I'd always respected the forest, treated it with the reverence my elders had instilled in me. But now, for the first time in years, I felt like an intruder, unwelcome, unsafe. The fire tower loomed ahead, a skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky. As I approached, my flashlight beam caught something moving near its base. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe it was one of the missing campers, seeking shelter in the old structure. But as I drew closer, that hope turned to ice in my veins. The figure hunched at the base of the tower was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall if it had been standing upright. Matted fur covered its body, and its limbs seemed too long, too angular to belong to any animal I knew. I froze, my hand tightening on my gun. The creature was feeding on something, its massive head bent low over its kill. Then, as if sensing my presence, it stopped. Slowly it raised its head and turned towards me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I knew true fear. Its face was a nightmare, the elongated snout of a wolf, but wrong somehow. The jaw was too wide, filled with jagged teeth that jutted out at impossible angles. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. They were intelligent, filled with a malevolence that was all too human. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then, with a speed that defied its size, the creature lunged towards me. I barely had time to raise my weapon before it was upon me, its weight knocking me backwards into the underbrush. The smell of wet fur and rotting meat filled my nostrils as I struggled beneath its bulk. I fired blindly, the sound of the gunshot deafening in the quiet forest. The creature reeled back, giving me just enough space to scramble away. I fired again, this time seeing my shot connect. Dark blood oozed from a wound in its side, but it didn't go down. Instead, it swayed for a moment, its eyes locked on mine with an almost human expression of surprise and rage. Then, before I could fire again, it turned and bolted into the woods. The speed and agility with which it moved, dodging between trees and leaping over fallen logs, was terrifying. In seconds, it had vanished into the darkness, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the body it had left behind. Forcing myself to my feet, I approached the base of the tower. The creature's victim lay half hidden in the tall grass, a young man no more than 20 years old. His throat had been torn out in the same savage manner as the animals I'd found along the trail. He wasn't dressed for hiking, wearing jeans and a college sweatshirt instead of outdoor gear. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio. "This is Ranger Birdwing," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need immediate backup at the old Itasca fire tower, multiple casualties, and something else, something I can't explain." As I waited for a response, I kept my gun trained on the surrounding forest, every shadow seeming to hide a potential threat. The silence that had seemed oppressive before now felt like a living thing, pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't know what I had just encountered, but I knew one thing for certain. The forest I thought I knew so well had just become a much darker, more dangerous place. And somewhere out there, wounded but very much alive, was a creature that defied explanation, and it knew I was here. The wait for backup felt like an eternity. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I kept my back to the metal frame of the fire tower, my eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The young man's body lay just a few feet away, a stark reminder of the very real danger lurking in the darkness. As the minutes ticked by, my mind raced. What was that thing? In all my years in these woods, I'd never seen anything like it. It moved like no animal I knew, with a terrible intelligence in its eyes that spoke of something more than mere bestial hunger. I found myself wishing I'd paid more attention to the old stories my grandfather used to tell, tales of creatures that lurked in the shadows, remnants of a world that existed long before humans walked the earth. The radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Ranger Birdwing, this is search and rescue. We're about 30 minutes out. What's your situation? Over." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I'm at the base of the old Itasca fire tower. I've got one confirmed casualty male, early 20s, possible animal attack." I hesitated, unsure how to describe what I'd seen without sounding crazy. "Be advised, there's a large predator in the area, unlike anything I've ever encountered. It's injured but extremely dangerous. Approach with caution. Over." There was a pause before the response came. "Copy that, Birdwing. Sit tight, we're on our way. Out." As I lowered the radio, a low, mournful howl echoed through the forest. It was distant but unmistakable, and utterly alien. No wolf I'd ever heard made a sound like that. It was filled with pain, rage, and something else. A kind of hungry desperation that made my skin crawl. I tightened my grip on the gun, my injured leg throbbing in time with my racing heart. The creature was still out there, wounded and angry, and I had a sinking feeling that our encounter wasn't over. The minutes crawled by, each one feeling longer than the last. I found myself thinking about my family back on the reservation, my younger siblings, my parents, my grandfather. What would they think if they could see me now, huddled in fear in the forest I'd always considered a second home? A branch snapped somewhere to my left, and I whirled, gun raised. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing, just trees and shadows. But the feeling of being watched intensified. I could almost feel the creature's eyes on me, filled with that terrible alien intelligence. "Show yourself," I shouted, immediately regretting the outburst. My voice sounded small and frightened in the vast silence of the forest. Another howl answered me, closer this time, much closer. And then I saw it, a flicker of movement just at the edge of my light's reach. A flash of matted fur, a glimpse of those two long limbs. It was circling, testing me, looking for a weakness. I fired a warning shot into the air, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. For a moment everything went quiet, then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was a sound of pure malevolence, a promise of violence to come. Just when I thought I couldn't take the tension anymore, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distant whump, whump, whump of helicopter blades. Search and rescue was close. The creature heard it too. There was a crash of underbrush, and I caught one last glimpse of its massive form as it loped away into the darkness. The howl that followed was filled with frustration and rage. It knew its chance was slipping away. Minutes later, the forest was alive with light and sound. The helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight cutting through the canopy. Voices called out as the search team made its way up the trail. I sagged against the tower in relief, the adrenaline that had been keeping me going suddenly draining away. As the first rescuers reached me, I tried to explain what had happened. I told them about the creature, about its impossible size and speed, about the intelligence in its eyes. They listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in their faces. To them, it was just another animal attack. Tragic, but not unheard of in these parts. They took my statement, photographed the scene, and bagged the young man's body for transport. A medic cleaned and bandaged the gashes on my leg, assuring me that they didn't look too deep. Through it all, I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see those terrible eyes glaring back at me. As we prepared to leave, one of the senior rangers pulled me aside. "Look, Joe," he said, his voice low and concerned, "I know you've been through a lot tonight, but this story about some kind of monster, it doesn't look good. Might be better if you stick to the facts in your official report, you know." I wanted to argue, to make him understand what I'd seen, but I knew how it would sound, so I just nodded, too exhausted to fight. As we made our way back down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest felt different now, darker and more menacing than I'd ever known it to be. I found myself wondering if I'd ever be able to look at these woods the same way again. One thing was certain, whatever that creature was, it was still out there, wounded, angry, and waiting, and somehow I knew that our paths would cross again. The thought filled me with a dread that settled deep in my bones, a fear that I knew would haunt my dreams for years to come. The old spirits my grandfather spoke of were real, and they were far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The days following the incident at the fire tower passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. I found myself recounting the events over and over, first to my superiors, then to local law enforcement, and finally to a stone-faced FBI agent who seemed more interested in my background than in the details of what I'd encountered in the woods. With each retelling, I could see the doubt growing in their eyes. The physical evidence didn't match up with my story. The claw marks on my leg were attributed to a bear, the young man's death to a wolf attack. The other animal carcasses I'd seen along the trail were nowhere to be found when the search team went back to investigate. "Maybe you were in shock," my supervisor suggested gently during our final debriefing. "It was dark, you were alone, and you just discovered a body. It's understandable that your mind might have embellished things a bit." I wanted to argue to make them understand the reality of what I'd seen. But how could I explain the intelligence in those eyes, the wrongness of its form, the bone-deep terror I'd felt in its presence? In the harsh light of day, surrounded by the familiar trappings of civilization, even I was starting to doubt my own memories. They gave me 2 weeks of paid leave, ostensibly to recover from my injuries. But I could read between the lines. They wanted me to get my head straight, to come back with a more rational explanation for what had happened that night. I returned to the reservation, seeking solace in the familiar surroundings of my childhood home. My family welcomed me with open arms, but I could see the concern in their eyes. News traveled fast in our small community, and the story of my encounter in the woods had already reached them, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. It was my grandfather who finally broke through the fog of confusion and self-doubt that had settled over me. He found me sitting by the lake one evening, staring out at the water as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You saw something out there, didn't you, Joseph?" he asked, lowering himself to sit beside me with a grunt, "something the others don't want to believe in." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands busy whittling a small piece of wood. "The old stories," he began, his voice low and serious. "They're not just stories, you know. They're warnings, passed down through generations, reminders that there are things in this world beyond our understanding." I turned to look at him, seeing the firelight of countless storytelling sessions reflected in his eyes. "What was it, Grandpa? What did I see out there?" He shook his head slowly. "I can't tell you that, Joseph. The old ones had many names for the dark spirits that roam the wild places: Wendigo, Rugaru, Manitou. But names have power. To speak them is to invite their attention." A chill ran down my spine at his words. Then what am I supposed to do? How can I go back out there knowing that thing is still out there? My grandfather placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "You carry the blood of warriors, Joseph. Our people have lived alongside these spirits for thousands of years. We've learned to respect the balance, to navigate the spaces between our world and theirs." He pressed the small wooden carving into my hand, a stylized wolf, its features somehow both familiar and alien. "Keep this with you. Remember who you are, where you come from. The spirits recognize their own." As I turned the carving over in my hands, feeling the smooth contours of the wood, a sense of calm settled over me for the first time since that night in the woods. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I wasn't alone in this. Generations of my ancestors had faced these dark forces and survived. I could do the same. The next day I called my supervisor and told him I was ready to come back to work. The forest felt different when I returned to duty. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound more ominous. I found myself jumping at the snap of twigs underfoot, my hand constantly straying to the reassuring weight of my sidearm. The wooden wolf carving my grandfather had given me hung from a leather thong around my neck, a constant reminder of the strength and wisdom of my ancestors. My colleagues treated me with a mixture of concern and wariness. I could see it in their eyes. They were waiting for me to crack, to prove that the monster story had been nothing more than the delusions of a man pushed to his breaking point. I was determined not to give them the satisfaction. Weeks passed, and slowly life began to return to some semblance of normalcy. The incident at the fire tower faded from immediate memory, replaced by the day-to-day concerns of managing the vast wilderness under our care. But I never forgot. Every time I ventured into the deeper parts of the forest, I felt those eyes on me, watching, waiting. It was nearly 2 months after my encounter when the reports started coming in. Hikers describing strange noises in the night, campers swearing they'd seen something large moving through the trees on the edge of their firelight. Each incident was dismissed, the overactive imaginations of city folk unused to the sounds and sights of the true wilderness. But I knew better. It was out there, and it was getting bolder. The breaking point came on a cold October night. A group of college students on a camping trip failed to check in at their designated time. A search party was organized, and I volunteered immediately, ignoring the concerned looks from my fellow rangers. We set out just before dusk, the fading light casting long shadows through the trees. The students' last known location was near a series of caves about 5 miles from where I'd had my encounter. As we neared the area, a familiar sense of dread settled over me. The forest was too quiet, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath our boots and the occasional crackle of our radios. We found the students' campsite easily enough, tents still erected, gear strewn about as if they'd left in a hurry. But of the students themselves there was no sign. As the other rangers began to set up a base camp and organize search grids, I felt a pull towards the caves. Something was calling me, a whisper on the edge of hearing that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to my soul. I should have reported it, should have waited for backup. But some instinct told me that time was running out. Gripping my grandfather's carving tightly, I slipped away from the group and made my way towards the yawning mouth of the nearest cave. The beam of my flashlight seemed feeble against the oppressive darkness of the cave interior. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing off the stone walls. And there, barely visible on the damp cave floor, were tracks, large canine-like prints that were just wrong. Too big, the spacing off as if made by something that walked on 2 legs as often as 4. I followed the tracks deeper into the cave system, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The air grew thick and fetid, that same musty odor I'd encountered months ago now almost overpowering. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I froze, my light falling on a scene that would haunt me for the rest of my days. There, in a large cavern, stood the creature. It was even more terrifying than I remembered. Its matted fur caked with blood and filth, its misshapen muzzle pulled back in a snarl that revealed rows of yellowed, jagged teeth. At its feet lay 2 of the missing students, their bodies broken and torn. But it was the 3rd student that truly chilled my blood. She was alive, pressed against the far wall of the cavern, her eyes wide with terror. And the creature, it was toying with her, circling, feinting, enjoying her fear in a way that was horribly, unmistakably intelligent. I knew I should run, should go for help, but the girl's eyes met mine, filled with a desperate, pleading hope. I couldn't leave her. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the cavern, my gun raised. "Hey," I shouted, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "Remember me?" The creature's head snapped towards me, its eyes narrowing in recognition. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, with a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, it charged. I fired, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the cavern in stark relief. The creature staggered, but didn't fall. It was faster than I remembered, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as claws barely missed my face. Rolling to my feet, I fired again and again, each shot finding its mark but seeming to do little more than enrage the beast further. The girl, seizing her chance, made a dash for the cave entrance. The creature's head whipped around, its attention momentarily divided. It was the opening I needed. With a prayer to whatever spirits might be listening, I charged forward, my shoulder connecting with the creature's side. We went down in a tangle of limbs, its hot breath on my face, claws raking across my chest. Pain exploded through me as I felt its teeth sink into my shoulder. But even as darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision, my hand found the wooden wolf carving, still hanging around my neck. A jolt of something passed through me. Strength, defiance, the collective will of generations of my people who had faced down the darkness and survived. With a roar of my own, I pressed the carving against the creature's face. The effect was immediate and shocking. The beast reared back with a howl of pain and fury, smoke rising from where the carving had touched its flesh. It stumbled backwards, shaking its massive head as if trying to clear it. I didn't waste the opportunity. Grabbing my fallen flashlight, I shone the beam directly into its eyes. The creature flinched, momentarily blinded, and I ran. I caught up with the girl at the cave entrance, half dragging her as we stumbled out into the night. Behind us, the enraged roars of the creature echoed through the cave system. We made it back to the base camp, our story spilling out in a jumbled mess of terror and adrenaline. This time there was no denying the evidence. The bodies of the 2 students were recovered from the cave, bearing wounds that no known animal could have inflicted. And there, burned into the cave wall, was a handprint, far too large to be human, with elongated fingers that ended in wicked claws. In the days that followed, the forest was swarming with FBI agents, cryptozoologists, and even a team from a cable TV show about paranormal investigations. The official story was a bear attack, albeit one by an animal of unusual size and aggression. But I knew the truth, as did the handful of others who had seen the evidence with their own eyes. The creature was never found, despite an extensive search of the cave system and surrounding forest. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear its howl echoing across the lakes and through the trees. I still work as a ranger, though now I spend more time training new recruits than patrolling the deep woods. I tell them all the same thing: respect the forest, trust your instincts, and always remember that there are things out there beyond our understanding. And if they ever find themselves alone in the woods, feeling eyes upon them and hearing sounds that shouldn't exist, well, I make sure they each have a little wooden wolf of their own just in case.